Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about What If Naruto x Yasaka High School Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for Part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Sensei. Naruto called out to the man to the left of him as they traversed through the dense forest in an attempt to catch up with their target. Their target, which happened to be flying up ahead on a large clay bird while barraging them with small explosives. Small glimpses could be seen every now and then when they would be passing by a clearing. Blue eyes narrowed as Naruto spotted another small clearing up ahead. Deciding to take his chances, he channeled a small amount of chakra to his feet before propelling himself forward. Wait. Naruto Kakashi began, only for his words to fall on deaf ears as he watched his student quickly gain speed. Reaching the clearing, he flashed through a set of hand seals with speeds that would make Kakashi proud, while simultaneously shocked that his student was capable of nature transformation. Taking a deep breath, he aimed upwards before shooting out several small wind bullets. Fueton. Vacuum sphere. He intoned as he watched his jutsu travel upwards just as their target flew above them. Kakashi caught up to his student and watched as the small wind bullets Naruto had shot out created holes in one of the clay bird's wings. A small smirk graced his features as with their enhanced eyesight, they could see the shocked expression their target wore as the clay bird destabilized. Deciding that he could question Naruto later, Kakashi quickly moved towards the location he estimated their target had crashed, Naruto right on his heels. They arrived at the area and spotted several trees that had been destroyed as a result of the crash. The large clay bird laid there in the middle, but their target was nowhere to be seen. Creating two clones, Naruto sent them towards the crashed bird, where they quickly got to work as they removed some of the clay that kept Gaara, the fifth Kazekage, and the reason they were after them in the first place, captive. Having dug out Gaara, the clones quickly returned while carrying him before Naruto commanded them to look after them. Just in time too, as Kakashi ran through a set of seals, a thick dirt wall rising into existence as the bird exploded barely a second later. Even from behind it they could feel the heat as the explosion chipped off the sides of the wall. Sensing a buildup of chakra from beside them, they looked only to come face to face with a small clay animal. Understanding what was happening, Naruto and Kakashi jumped away, the former sending a mental command for his clones and Gaara to do the same. The small animal exploded with enough force to render the remains of the wall to dust, along with a small crater with it. Naruto's eyes darted from side to side before spotting their target hiding behind some bushes and waved his arm in his direction. Kakashi was about to ask what it was that he did, but silenced himself as his Sharingan managed to catch a thin blade of wind flying in the direction he had waved. Dust kicked up as the wind blade impacted the ground used previously by their target, who had come out of hiding. His long blonde hair that was tied in a ponytail was covered in dirt and small amounts of blood. Blood which also leaked out of his mouth, though he still held a smirk. One of his arms was missing and the black cloak he wore was in tatters. That was unexpected, Deidara muttered after narrowly escaping death. His lone visible eye was staring intently at the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, who had displayed feats they weren't aware of, such as elemental manipulation or the fact that he was supposed to be much more emotional and easily goaded. One look in those blue eyes of his and Deidara knew he had made a grave mistake previously taunting him, as his eyes spelled death for those who would oppose him. The arrival of several chakra signatures behind them got everyone's attention as Team Guy appeared, each of them looking a little roughened up, but otherwise they seemed fine. Yo Kakashi, everything alright? Guy greeted his fellow Jonin and rival. Deidara cursed as he knew his chances of survival had basically plummeted dramatically with the arrival of an extra team. Narrowing his eyes in, though, a smirk crept its way onto his face as he thought of something that might allow him to get away. While they were still distracted by the arrival of the new team, he snuck his hand into his back before retrieving some clay. Just as their attention went back to him, they saw him ingesting said clay and his body warping. Art is a bang. Deidara screamed and Kakashi yelled for them to get back. His eye began changing to its Mangekyo state just in time as Deidara blew up in a massive explosion. Hamui. Kakashi said the same moment Deidara had exploded as space began to distort in front of all of them. Surely enough, Kakashi was able to keep the explosion contained as he sent it all to a different place. To where? Even he himself didn't know. Unfortunately, however, he didn't notice the small crack that had formed the moment he began sending the explosion away. Naruto, on the other hand, did as easily could tell that it was bad news as he could feel himself getting sucked into the crack. A quick look to his side, he could see the rest was experiencing the same problem but were unsure of the cause. His brain quickly figured out that if someone didn't do anything, then Kakashi would lose his balance and therefore unable to send the rest of the explosion away, no doubt resulting in everyone's death. Closing his eyes with a resigned sigh, he kept his eyes on the crack that seemed to be increasing in size as dirt began to get swallowed up. Sensei, tell Bachan I'm sorry. Before Kakashi could ask what he meant, Naruto darted forward. He paid no mind to the screams belonging to Team Guy. Keep focusing, Kakashi. He yelled at the man as he was expecting him to stop. A second later he reached the crack before, much to everyone's shock, he jumped right in. Naruto. They all called his name after having seen him disappear in front of his eyes. Neji activated his Byakugan in hopes of seeing him, but got nothing. By now Kakashi had managed to send the blast away, though he clenched his fist as he had seen what his student had done. Naruto, he mumbled as Guy's students ran past him to where Naruto suddenly disappeared. A hand touched his shoulders, and he looked behind him to see Guy looking at him, a serious expression marring his face. I know what you're thinking, but it was his choice. He sacrificed himself to ensure our safety. We should think where he was sent off to once we get back to Konoha and inform Hokage-sama what happened. Kakashi sighed and nodded. You're right, Guy. It's just he trailed off as Guy nodded, understanding what he meant. I understand, but for now we have to deal with the Kazukiage, speaking of which. He turned around to where he was laying. The clones that previously had been guarding him had dispelled the moment Naruto had disappeared before their eyes. Sitting behind her desk in the Hokage's office was Tsunade Senju, the fifth Hokage. Currently she was looking over several requests belonging to clans and merchants regarding an increase in funding. She scowled a bit as some of the requests were borderline absurd. The fact that several merchants were demanding more guards for their shops only agitated her further. Thankfully she was saved from destroying the desk in front of her as her assistant, Shizune, walked. She raised an eyebrow at the expression she wore before Shizune mentioned Team Guy and Kakashi had returned. A moment later both teams entered and she allowed her eyes to wander each of them before furrowing her brow as she looked them over once more. Ai, Lee, Neji, Tenten, Kakashi, Sakura, Naruto. Wait. Naruto. Her eyes scanned everyone in the room with increasing speeds and her breathing quickened in response to her distress at not seeing the spiky-haired blonde in the room with them. Kakashi. Where is Naruto? She practically demanded while doing her best to calm her rapidly beating heart. Upon the mention of his name everyone present lowered her head as she released a gasp. Her hand came up as her worst fears seemed to have come through. No, she muttered before shaking her head. He can't. Tsunade-sama. Naruto isn't dead. Kakashi quickly spoke as he didn't want to wait and see what was going to happen. Not dead, she repeated as she sighed in relief. Her breathing calmed down to its usual pace. Before leveling them with a glare that promised death should the next answer be insignificant. Tell me where is he? Here Kakashi scratched the back of his head, wondering how he should break it to her. Honestly, Tsunade-sama. We have reason to believe that Naruto has been swallowed up in a dimensional tear. Silence. That is what met his answer as Tsunade looked at like he just told her a joke. A dimensional tear. She repeated. Kakashi, you know the punishment for lying to your Hokage, correct? It's true, Hokage-sama. Neji butted in. We saw it with our own eyes. Naruto told Kakashi to apologize to you for him while he was busy defending us from an explosion that would have killed us. We couldn't even ask him what he meant before he shot forward. First we thought he was going to kill himself by running towards the explosion, but instead he ran slightly to the side of it. Then, before we could react he was suddenly gone. Not even my Byakugan could pick up anything. Tsunade looked at the rest who nodded, confirming what Neji said was true. Kakashi picked up the story. Tsunade-sama, we have reason to believe Naruto acted to save all of us. Well, I initially didn't notice during the time I was sending the explosion away whatever it was that swallowed up Naruto would have killed us, has he not done so? Once I was done we all noticed that we had moved several feet closer to the explosion than when we started. A few inches more and I would no doubt slipped, therefore breaking my concentration, and the explosion would have swallowed us all. So what you're saying is that Naruto once again sacrificed himself for the greater good. HMPH, at least this time it was on his own choice. Referencing to the fourth Hokage sealing the Kyuubi in Naruto. Anyway, this might not be completely bad. She mused as she grabbed an empty paper and began to write. While dimensional travel isn't anything new, the circumstances surrounding Naruto's case are. Usually it happens with a person attempting a jutsu such as Kuchius no Jutsu. I'm sending a letter to Jiraiya and order him to come back. He should have more information regarding these matters. This isn't completely terrible for Naruto, either, as without him, the Akatsuki can't continue their goals unless one of their members is well versed in the dimensional travel. She tapped her fingers on her desk before looking up at those present. Take the rest of the day off. Kakashi, Guy, I expect a report on my desk by tomorrow. She received 2 nods from both jounin. Dismissed. Didn't you hear me, Kakashi? I said you are dismissed. Tsunade looked at the jounin who was still present. You did, Tsunade-sama, but I want to ask something else. Oh? And that is? During the mission Naruto displayed a mastery of the wind element. I'm wondering if Jiraiya-sama mentioned anything of it as he didn't use any elemental jutsu during our test. Tsunade quickly shook her head. No, he didn't. Jiraiya said he had only improved the basics along with his taijutsu. Aside from that, he tried to increase Naruto's control over the Kyuubi, but had stopped after a certain incident. I see. Would you mind I would be present when Jiraiya-sama returns? Tsunade waved her hand dismissively. No, that's fine. You have first-hand witnessed his usage in wind manipulation, which will help. Kakashi bowed his head in thanks before with a poof of smoke he was gone. Indicating the usage of a shunshin. A groan escaped Naruto's mouth as he slowly regained consciousness. The first thing he realized as he moved his limbs was that every bone in his body hurt. So much that he had to bite back a scream that threatened to escape his dry throat. The next thing he noticed was that he was currently laying in what he would aptly name the most comfortable bed he'd ever rested on. Nothing could compare to the comfort he felt as he just laid there. Not his own bed in his apartment, nor the beds he had slept on during missions, or the rare occasions he and Jiraiya would stay at a hotel during their training trip. Though the constant beeping that was reaching his ears was something he could do without really. So, with much effort, his eyes slowly fluttered open, only for him to close them quickly as he was assaulted by a light that was way too bright for the moment. After a few seconds he once more opened his eyes, this time much slower. As his eyes opened, he was greeted to the sight of blank ceiling with the only thing on there being the lights. But, it looked different. A lot different from any hospitals he's been in. Eyes darted downwards, he noticed the room he was in was also much more, how'd he say, modern. Technologically advanced. Regardless, though it surpassed anything he had ever seen, even Snow Country didn't have this kind of technology the last time he'd been there. He then slowly turned his head, ignoring the small ache he felt when doing so, as he stared right at the source of the beeping noise he had been hearing. He raised his eyebrows as he looked at the strange screen that displayed some numbers and a weird pulse that went along with its beeping. It took him a few moments before he noticed it was attached to him, realizing that it was beeping along with his heartbeat. Interesting, he inwardly mused before going back to inspecting the room he was in. It was kind of empty aside from the bed, the weird machine next to him, a few paintings on the wall, a nightstand next to the bed, and that was it really. The sound of the door open gained his attention as he turned and looked as a young woman walked in. She had light brown hair and forest green eyes, which were focused on some papers she seemed to be reading. She was quite a beauty if he would compare her to some kunoichis back home. He cleared his throat in an attempt to get her attention, which worked as the young woman looked up from her papers. He saw her eyes widen briefly before she swiftly turned around, leaving him alone, blinking as he wondered what just happened. His unasked question was answered when the door leading to the room he was in opened once more a minute or two later. Immediately a blush formed on his whiskered cheeks as his eyes took in the inhuman beauty of the woman that had entered the room. She had blonde hair a shade or two lighter than his own, set in a single ponytail that went down her legs, a few strands framing the side of her face. Exotic golden-looking eyes which stared at him with almost smothering intensity. She was clad in a red hakama with over it a white haori which did nothing to hide her voluptuous figure or her larger-than-average chest. Man, if Jiraiya were here, the man would have died from a nosebleed 10 times over. However, what got his attention and caused his eyes to widen to their extremes were the 9 bushy-looking golden fox tails and the 2 fox ears that peeked out from between her hair. Yet despite that, it only added to her beauty, and the words left his mouth before realized what he said. Beautiful. His eyes widened as he understood what he just said, and, judging from the slight pink that dusted her pale cheeks, so did she. Before he could apologize, however, the blonde woman spoke up, having pushed down her blush at the unexpected compliment he had graced her with. Tell me, what are you? Even her voice was soft, soothing even, and Naruto felt a shiver run down his spine. He opened his mouth to reply before stopping himself upon realizing she said what, not who. Excuse me? He asked her with curiosity lacing his voice. What do you mean, what am I? He expected her to ask for his name, not what he is. He saw her narrow her eyes slightly at him, like she thought he was playing with her. Exactly like I asked, what are you? I can sense you have chakra in you, but I can also tell you aren't a yokai. Well, I can sense a deep darkness coming from your stomach area. I can tell it's not your own either. So tell me, what are you? I'm human. He said, though it came out more like he was questioning himself. He panicked slightly upon her mentioning she could sense the malevolent nature of the Kyuubi that sealed inside of him. He initially wondered if they had some relation between the two, but quickly shook that idea out of his mind, as there was no way that could be possible. The woman in front of his gave him a scrutinizing stare for a few seconds before she eventually nodded. Unable to find a lie in his words, though that didn't mean she was done with him yet though. Very well. What is your name? I am Uzumaki Naruto, pleasure to meet you, miss. He trailed off as he wasn't aware of her name. Oh. The blonde woman held an embarrassed blush as she realized she hadn't even introduced herself. I am Yasaka, leader of Kyoto and its yokai. She gestured to her 9 tails that calmly swayed behind her back. Naruto couldn't help but stare at the appendages with awe as he wondered how soft they were as they looked really soft. Ahem. He heard her speak and got out of his daze. An embarrassed blush sporting his cheeks as he was caught staring. Though for some reason the woman in front of him was blushing as well. Ah. Sorry Yasaka. He apologized, but the woman merely waved her hand, making it clear she was fine. Though inwardly she was somewhat surprised by the lack of sama or dono suffix he had added to her name. It was quite refreshing from everyone else she had heard it from. An awkward silence then filled the room as Naruto and Yasaka were left staring at one another. So what now? Naruto eventually asked. Well, she took a couple steps till she stood next to his bed before peeling off the covers covering him. Oh my, he heard her mumble in thin veiled amazement as she looked him over. Taking note of the muscle his body had despite appearing not even older than 18. Not even a single scar except this one. He shivered as he felt her soft fingers trace the scar left behind when Sasuke had impaled him with his Chidori-covered fist. Ah, I always heal quick he told her as Yasaka nodded her head before continuing her inspection of his body. So, do you think I can leave? I really hate hospitals. He grumbled and she giggled softly which sounded absolutely beautiful to his ears. Why yes, but I'd like to offer you to stay here. Seeing his expression she explained. We found you covered in blood and your clothes in tatters in one of the many fields here in Kyoto. Well, you explained you usually heal quickly, you can never be too sure, correct? I'm also a bit more curious about you. The look she sent him caused his cheeks to heat up, but he didn't seem to notice. You said you were human, but it's impossible for a human to use chakra. I myself have some theories which have to do with your sudden appearance in my territory, but I won't indulge in those until I can get a better idea of who you are, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto's choice was clear the moment she said he was in Kyoto. There was not a single place like such in the elemental nations. Combined with the extremely advanced technology they had here and the surprise of these yokai that he, a human, was capable of using chakra, he knew he was no longer anywhere in the elemental nations. No doubt a weird phenomenon regarding the tear that happened back with Kakashi and the rest was enough proof that he was in, as weird as it sounded, a completely different world. Strangely enough, he didn't feel particularly sad about that fact. If anything, he felt like a massive weight was removed off of his shoulders. A weight that had been placed by the Akatsuki's presence looming over his existence as a Jinchuriki. But here, in this world, there was no such thing. Well, he doubted this world was without its own conflicts, at least they didn't involve him. Letting his mind wander, he turned and looked at Yasaka to see her gazing expectantly at him. He flashed her a smile before he spoke. I would like that very much, thank you. Yasaka clasped her hands together as a beautiful smile stretched onto her face. Great. I'll let the doctor know you're okay to leave. I will also send someone with some clothes that'll fit you. Thanking her once more, he watched as she turned around, her tails swiftly moving with her with such grace, and he could hear her footsteps as she left his room. Releasing a deep breath, Naruto let himself fall back into the bed he was laying in. He didn't get to enjoy it for long, however, as seconds after his head hit the pillow he was called into the familiar surroundings which belonged to his seal. Frowning, he stared up at the ceiling of the hallway he found himself in. A part of his body submerged in water, though he paid it no mind. Instead, he released an audible groan as he stood up before he began traversing through the ankle-deep water, his destination being the location he could sense the fox was at. It took a couple of seconds, but he finally arrived before the enormous golden cage that kept the Kyuubi at bay. Worry began to fill his mind the second his eyes lay prey on the deteriorating seal that kept it closed off before he shifted his attention to the pair of large crimson pupils that stared at him. Naruto, do you have any idea what you have done? The Kyuubi spoke as it growled at him. Naruto furrowed his brows before nodding hesitantly. Yes. I entered that weird crack that had formed when Kakashi was dealing with the explosion. Why? In response, the Kyuubi growled louder before sending out a wave of his malevolent chakra. Naruto stiffened in response before calming his mind to his best ability in order to counter the feeling of death that had assaulted him. Look down, foolish boy. The Bijuu screamed, and Naruto did what it said, only for his eyes to widen even more than when he had first laid his eyes on Yasaka. There, in the ankle-deep water and staring back at him, was his own reflection. Though there were several differences that warranted his reaction. The first thing he noticed was that his eyes changed from blue to deep purple and his pupils had thinned into slits. The second thing he noticed was that he seemed a bit taller, older, even as his face had gotten a tiny bit more angular. However, the main change that got most of his attention were the now 2 blonde fox ears on the top of his head, along with the 2 golden tails similar to Yasaka's own. What? His head shot up as he looked the massive Bijuu in the eye with an accusing gaze. What did you do to me? He yelled with a mixture of shock and wonder. The Bijuu scoffed. I didn't do a thing, boy. It was your own fault for jumping into that dimensional tier. Who does that? A fool that is who. And now look what's happening. The large fox sniffed as it took a few steps forward, allowing Naruto to see the Biju in its entirety. Raising an eyebrow at what it was doing, his eyes traveled over the titanic form of the Biju. Then, his eyes widened as his gaze settled on the cause of the fox's torment. As there, swaying behind the Biju were its tails. All 7 of them. What happened to your tails? Don't tell me. He quickly looked down at his reflection before back. Kyuubi's tails. Yes. My beautiful tails. Gone. All because of you. Ah, but how? He sputtered as he looked at the Biju for answers. Traveling dimensions requires a strong body and life force, and while your Uzumaki blood helps, it's not enough by far. It took everything I had to keep you alive, which resulted in what's happening right now. To put it simply, boy, you are absorbing me. I don't know how that is possible, but it has to do something with the seal that accursed Yondaime used. The Kyuubi threw its head back as it roared in anger. How long? Naruto asked after a few tense moments of silence. How long until I absorb you, as you put it? The Kyuubi huffed before it lay down on its 2 hands. A few months, a year maybe. It depends on the rate you are assimilating my chakra and how much your body can hold, though it could be much longer. Naruto opened his mouth to ask another question, but was beaten to the punch as the Biju spoke first. You're wondering how that fox woman, Yasaka, didn't see your new appendages. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as the Biju was correct. Unlike your changed eyes and body, which I guarantee she didn't miss, you need to will your tails and ears into existence for them to show up. Naruto rose an eyebrow before he concentrated and felt something shift around his body. Turning his head, he watched in awe as behind him 2 golden tails were swaying, both appearing to be attached to his tailbone. Moving his hands up next, he cupped his fox ears, though was disappointed he couldn't feel actually any fur, something he wrote off as being due to not being in the real world. I see. Thank you for telling me this, Kyuubi. You don't seem so bad after all, though that might have something to do with the situation we are in. I will go back to the outside world for now. I will come and visit you if you want, at least perhaps there's something in this world that can keep you alive. But that Naruto turned around, missing the slight widening of the Biju's eyes at his words before it scoffed and closed. We'll see, Naruto, but perhaps you are the one the old man spoke about. Outside, Naruto opened his blue eyes before looking towards the nightstand next to the bed, where now a pair of clothes were laying. Picking of the sheets covering his form, he slowly stepped out of bed, groaning along the way before stretching his arms above his head from not using them for a while. Grabbing the articles of clothing, Naruto unfolded them to see it was a black kimono and with an orange obi that went along with it. He wondered if it was coincidence that they went with orange or not. While the kimono didn't look like anything special, just the feel of it made Naruto quickly realize that it was of very high quality, much like those kimonos he would often see nobles walk around with. Securing the obi, he grabbed the next piece of clothing, which revealed to be black yukata matching nicely with the kimono he wore. Glancing down, he spotted a pair of sandals quite unlike shinobi sandals. These were much more casual and put them on. Rolling his shoulders once and satisfied with how the clothes felt, he exited the room he had occupied, only to almost walk straight into an older-looking male who bowed his head slightly towards him upon noticing him. Uzumaki, Naruto. The old man spoke quietly and he quickly nodded his head. Yes. Follow me please. Yasaka ordered me to lead you to her as she has to discuss several things with you, including where you will be staying during your time here. Alright, lead the way. He said with a nod of his head. He indeed had nowhere to stay, especially given that this was a completely new world or dimension, though he was unsure what the difference between the two were. So with that in mind, he silently followed the older man outside. Boom. Sigh. Boom. Breath in. Breath out. Boom. Smack. Yasaka released a deep breath as her hand impacted the desk she was sitting behind. Even now she could feel the aftershock reaching her all the way inside her office. She had given Naruto a location to train after he requested one, as he couldn't train in the city without causing panic. It was an area she would often use herself whenever she wished to blow off some steam, but already regretted her decision. Seriously? What was he doing that she could feel it from all the way over here? Even whenever she was there, never had she received any reports that tremors and/or noise could even be felt from this distance. Unless of course they were afraid of her and lied, but that's another story. Slowly her expression of annoyance shifted into a small smile as she thought of the blonde that she had found in her territory and wounded. It had been 2 months since that day, and she honestly had to say that she enjoyed his company. He was so different from the usual people she interacted with. He didn't stare at her like she was some object, like a prize or a piece of meat she had seen other men stare at her. Well, yes, she had caught him checking her out more than once, but when she would point it out, he would just tell her that he found her beautiful and that she couldn't really blame him for that. It was so refreshing. It amazed her as well how easy he could say things like complimenting her on her beauty, as if he were talking about the weather. It was like he was oblivious to the effect his words had on her, not even noticing the flustered state he'd put her in every time. Boom. Eyebrow twitching, Yasaka pushed her chair back before standing up as another, this time louder explosion was heard. Sorry Naruto-kun, but enough is enough. I already have a hard time covering up why Kyoto has been experiencing several earthquakes the past few weeks, and I doubt they'll believe me for much longer. Yasaka mumbled to herself as she moved to put on her white haori on top of her traditional Maiko outfit. Giving herself a once-over, Yasaka exited her office and made her way to stop a certain blonde from causing more panic to spread. That was amazing. Naruto exclaimed with childlike glee as he stared at the destruction caused by his previous attack, even as he was out of breath, having to exert himself this much. His blue eyes were inspecting the several dozen feet craters that had scarred the previously flat surface he was standing on. Trees had been blown away by the aftershock created with each explosion, and due to the pressure, not capable of traveling freely with how the mountains were surrounding the area he was currently in. Not bad for your first attempt. Though, you should compress it more before firing it to concentrate the damage more. Naruto heard the Biju speak to him from within. More? Yes, those craters are child's play compared to the real deal. Even Shukaku can do better than you at the moment. Naruto's eye twitched at the comment, feeling surprisingly offended as the pair of fox ears on top of head joined in. Asshole fox, he muttered before going back over inspecting the results of using a Bijuodama. Well, multiple in this instance. Taking a deep breath, he held his hands outstretched in front of him before focusing intently on maintaining the correct ratio required to complete the technique. Slowly but surely a small black-colored ball of pure chakra began to form in front of his hands. Concentrating on it, Naruto began to slowly feed it more chakra while keeping an eye out to make sure it wasn't going to explode in front of him. As it grew to a size that it was as big as he himself, he slowly began to compress the ball of pure chakra. Cracks began to form on the ground beneath his feet as it grew smaller but kept the same volume. A drop of sweat ran down the side of his face as the ball of pure chakra was now the size of his own head. Just a bit more and then. Naruto, when are you going to mate with that Yasaka woman? The sudden question came out of nowhere and caught him off guard. So shocked by the question, he let the Bijuodama fly as it traveled at insane speeds past the training grounds and instead impacted one of the mountains surrounding it. Boom. An enormous explosion followed as Naruto spit out all kinds of profanities to the Biju inside of him, as not only did he lose his concentration, he missed the training grounds completely with that attack. As the explosion died down, Naruto could see the result of the attack, as a massive crater was now visible on the side of the mountain. How was he going to explain this to Yasaka? That was impressive. Despite the end result not being what he wanted, Naruto couldn't help but agree. The crater was many times larger than any previous attempts he had. Wait. Slowly Naruto turned around before promptly paling to the point his skin color matched that of snow. There, standing not too far from him was Yasaka in her usual glory, and she did not look happy one bit. Hello Yasaka. He chuckled nervously as he quickly looked away the moment their eyes met. Hello to you as well, Naruto-kun. I see you've been busy. Her eyes glanced over the numerous craters the training area held before coming to rest on the large crater his last attack had caused. Naruto flinched slightly as his ears on top of his head flattened as the three kitsune tails behind him slumped down. Yasaka had kept herself from squealing at the scene as she was supposed to reprimand him. Her own tail swung dangerously behind her as she slowly walked towards him. Each step made him tense up slightly until she was standing in front of him. She took her time to look him over, getting a good glance of his appearance with the kitsune features visible. He honestly didn't look bad. In fact, if anything, it seemed to suit him very well, especially the ears that peeked out between his spiky hair. Looking at him now reminded her the first time she had seen him with his tails and ears out. Flashback. Interesting. Naruto said as he looked at himself in the mirror. Currently he was clad only in black shorts, his fox ears and two tails visible with the latter flowing freely behind him. You know, I'm surprised myself how well I'm adapting to this. He commanded one of his tails to curl in front of him and ran his hands through the blonde fur it held. Holy shit. This feels amazing. He began to comb his fingers through the fur before switching out one tail for the other. HMPH. Of course it does, though you will quickly get used to it. Does that blonde know you're turning into a yaokai? Naruto shook his head. No, I haven't, I'm not sure how to bring that up, you know. Like, oh by the way Yasaka. Yeah, I have a 9-tailed fox sealed inside of me from birth, but due to how wounded I was when I arrived I'm slowly absorbing him. That will only bring up more questions and I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. He said with a frown. Foolish boy. Stop with that excuse. You are afraid she will think different of you, but you are forgetting something, she's a yaokai herself. The Biju yelled at him like he was stupid. If this was back in Konoha I would agree that you should keep to yourself, but we aren't. Didn't she tell you that Kyoto was a city home to most of the yokai this world has? Or did you forget that talk you two had weeks ago? Naruto blinked as he processed Abijuu's words before realizing that it was indeed correct. Once he was out of the hospital, the older male had led him to Yasaka's office where the two had a long conversation about how he exactly ended up here. Naruto had simply told her the truth, as said he came from a different world, one where humans were capable of using chakra in ways Yasaka had never even thought of. He told her the humans in his world were shinobi and used chakra for all kinds of things such as jutsu. When asked for a demonstration, Naruto had shrugged his shoulders before he held his hand out as a Rasengan formed in seconds. Something that surprised Ian himself, as usually he needed a shadow clone to do so, and especially since he had noticed his own reserves had grown immensely due to the acquisition of two of Kyuubi's tails. Though he didn't question it and let Yasaka marvel at the swirling ball of pure chakra in his hand. He then told her how he was on a mission, having explained that missions were what shinobis did as a living and that during one of the missions a tear in their dimension had formed. Had he not sacrificed himself by entering it, his whole team would have ended up dead, as he was only capable of surviving due to his enhanced healing factor. And even then it was a close call. While it sounded all like one big, made-up lie to Yasaka, the evidence was right there as she had seen it herself. Even the chakra he used was slightly different of yokai, as his was much more potent yet free-flowing at the same time. He also told her that there were no such thing as yokai where he was from, keeping the knowledge of Bijuu's to himself, as that was of no concern to her. Once he was done explaining and Yasaka was satisfied, it was her turn as she gave him a basic rundown of the history the world had. From the different factions that existed aside from yokai and who their leaders were, to the existence of actual gods that were living. Throughout her explanation, Naruto was wide-eyed. She even showed him a map of the world that was absolutely massive compared to the single continent the elemental nations had. As she finished up on informing him, it had started to get dark, and to his surprise, Yasaka offered him to stay in one of the guest rooms in her home. While initially denying her offer, he eventually accepted after realizing she wasn't going to take no for an answer. What surprised him even more was that she would often, whenever she had free time, visit him, answering any question he had, which were quite a lot, as Yasaka had given him access to the library that Kyoto had. He had probably read more in a single week here than he had in his life. And so days would pass quickly with himself reading up on the history of the world and the supernatural, while spending time with Yasaka whenever she would come and visit him. You're right, I guess I'm still not completely used to this despite how nice she's been since I've been here. She also deserves to know, especially if in some time I'll end up as a Kyuubi yokai much like her. Though I only gained an extra tail in 3 months. Good, finally thinking with your brain, are you, brat? As for your tails, due to starting with 2 tails instead of 1, it takes longer for your body to get used to the extra chakra you suddenly gained. Which is why even with you training for days and throwing jutsu around, it will take longer for a third one to appear. I see, he mumbled as he returned his attention to his new appendages. Perhaps once I tell her she can help me out, as I have some cool ideas what I can do with these. Suddenly, without a warning, the door belonging to the room he was in was opened as Yasaka walked in. Naruto-kun, here are some of the books you. Yasaka halted her speech mid-sentence as she looked wide-eyed at the new appearance of her guest. They looked mostly the same with the exception for 2 things. The first being the pair of blonde bushy tails that had frozen in the air behind him, the second being the fox ears she could see peeking out between his messy blonde locks. I was planning on telling you," he said, but he didn't sound convincing at all as the ears on top of his head flattened in resignation. "Very well," was all Yasaka said as one of her tails moved to close the door. The accusing glare she sent him didn't help him feel better whatsoever. On top of his current situation, he could hear the Bijuu laughing at his misfortune and quickly cut the link before focusing on the blonde vixen making his way towards him with a dark aura surrounding her. Flashback end. In the end, he had come clean completely. She suppressed a smirk at the memory of how quickly she got him to talk. It seemed like she still had it in her. It was interesting though, hearing him explain the practices of their people. Though she also found it barbaric to seal a yokai into a child who would grow up into a weapon. A brief frown crossed her face as she remembered him talk about his childhood. She didn't like how his blue eyes had dimmed as he told her his experience growing up in loneliness. How he grew up in a place that loathed his existence. She wasn't sure if she would be able to handle it were she in his shoes. Getting back to the matter at hand, though, her earlier anger had dissipated as she watched how sad he looked. His ears and tails having a big role in the part, and she sighed. "I can't get angry at you like this, Naruto-kun." His mood did a quick 180 as his tails and ears regained their life and he flashed her a smile. "That doesn't mean I will let you go scot-free, though." And he promptly lost his smile. "No training here until I say so, okay?" Receiving no reply, she repeated her words. "I said, no training until I say so, okay?" She got a quick nod from him in return. "Good." Sorry Naruto-kun, but I have a hard time dealing with the tremors you are causing from that weird attack you're launching. Not to mention the crater that you caused not even a minute ago. Alright, I understand. Naruto conceded as he knew he would lose should he fight her. She smiled before clasping her hands together. Great. Now, let's head back so I can decide your punishment. She turned around as one of her tails reached for his before intertwining with it and began to walk. Due to her walking just a bit in front of her, she was unable to see the blush he sported, nor the shiver that went down his spine from the feel, all while grumbling something incoherently to the Biju inside of him. I'm not going to have sex with her. He yelled just as they were about to leave the area. His sudden outburst caused Yasaka to stop and made him bump into her as his blush deepened several shades darker upon realizing he said that out loud. Hiding down her own blush that had formed on her cheeks, Yasaka shook her head before continuing to lead them away from the area. She would send some yokai out later to fix it up to the best of their abilities, as for now she continued their walk while doing her best to ignore the suggestive images that invaded her mind from his outburst. 2 months. That was how long Naruto had been gone ever since the rescue attempt of the Kazekage happened, and so far no one had come any closer to finding out where Naruto was. She had informed Jiraiya of what happened, and the man had wasted no time reverse summoning himself to the toads and see if they had any idea how to get him back. They had already tried reverse summoning him there, but it didn't work. Either it was impossible or it required an amount of chakra that nobody had. Though Jiraiya had also reported that the Akatsuki was aware of what happened though continued the search for other Jinchuriki. Supposedly they were looking for ways to reach him as well as without him they couldn't continue. It was the only good thing that came out of the event as they were pushing the Akatsuki back for whatever their goal was. The only thing was that they knew it was bad if it required all the Biju. Tsunade had informed the rest of his friends what happened and that Naruto was missing. Missing, not dead. Regardless though Hinata had taken the news the worst as the girl had burst into tears upon hearing her crush was gone. There was a chance she would never be able to tell him how she felt and had locked herself inside the Hyuga compound ever since, only coming out when her team was training. Sighing softly Tsunade stared at the wall to her left, more precisely the portrait belonging to the 4th Hokage. If Naruto would ever return she swore to herself she would tell him who his parents were. Initially her sensei, Sarutobi Hiruzen kept it away out of fear of other villages, knowing the 4th Hokage had a son until he got older. Now that he indeed was older he never got to it having sacrificed himself during the invasion 3 years ago. It was a foolish decision in her opinion as a lot of Naruto's childhood could have been fixed had he not hid the boy's heritage. But alas, it had happened and there was nothing she could do aside from attempting to fix it should he return to them. Jiraiya, any news? Tsunade asked upon sensing the chakra signature belonging to her teammate entering her office. Materializing into existence before her she saw the man nod his head. Indeed I have Haim, but it's not about Naruto. Tsunade frowned at that before motioning for him to continue. The Akatsuki have 4 Biju so far. My contact in Iowa said they saw 2 men fighting against the Jinchuriki of the Yonbi. Both males with one having long dark hair and the other resembling a shark, I take it you know who these 2 are. Tsunade nodded her head. Of course she did as there were only 2 people in that organization with those features. One being Uchiha Itachi and the latter Hoshigaki Kisame. And what is Iwa's response to the capture of their Jinchuriki? Jiraiya shrugged his shoulders. So far. Nothing, it seems Inoki is letting them take go without attempting to retrieve them. A slight scowl marred Jiraiya's face as he spoke. Tsunade scoffed. Of course Inoki would let them, if I recall correct he has used them before right, the Akatsuki. Indeed he has, several times even. He probably knows if he attempts anything he won't be able to use them again or that retrieving their Jinchuriki is useless. Tsunade shook her head. I guess he's also keeping the news inside Iowa out of fear other villages may attempt something. Her words were met with a nod from the white-haired man in her office. Very well. You're free to leave. Alright, by the way where was it that they had fought Dodara? River country. Yes, why? I'm heading out there in a couple of days to see if there's anything that can give me a hint of where Naruto could be. Tsunade thought about it before nodding in agreement before her eyes lit up as she remembered something. Before you go I can tell you that we found some interesting items when searching through the Gaki's apartment. She opened a drawer before retrieving a small book and handing it over to Jiraiya who opened it and looked through it. It belongs to Naruto, it has all kinds of information in it ranging from jutsus to stories about his childhood. Before you read it I warn you that some of the things are less than pleasant. Jiraiya closed the book before looking back at her. Less than pleasant. Though we now know where he got those wind jutsus from. Question is when and where did he learn them? Tsunade shrugged her shoulders as she didn't know either. Not sure, but I can safely say that it was during the trip you 2 had. My guess is that the Gaki managed to discover the secret behind the shadow clones and had them learn while the real one was with you. As for the warning. Let's just say that sensei screwed up more than I at first thought. I see. He mumbled as he gave the small book another look over. Well, I'll look it through when I'm heading towards river country. With that said, a cloud of smoke enveloped the toad sage as he was gone. Tsunade turned around in her chair till she was facing the window, a frown marring her face as she gazed down upon the village. Come back soon, Naruto. Walking through the hallways of her own home, Yasaka entered the living room only for her eyebrows to rise as she saw Naruto was also there, sitting on the couch, his eyes glued to the television. A small smile graced her face as she noticed he was completely immersed into whatever he was currently watching to the point he wasn't aware her eyes were on him. Chuckling softly to herself, her gaze shifted to the side where a clock was hanging. 10:42 p.m, it read, making her frown slightly for having worked till late in the evening. Deciding she would spend some time with him before she was going to bed, she silently walked over to the couch he was sitting. Once she got close enough, she plopped herself down next to him, a mischievous smile adorning her face as she saw him jump a little. Ah. Yasaka-chan. Naruto yelped as he sent her a playful glare, which she responded by widening her smile. Sorry Naruto-kun, but I couldn't help myself. You seemed so invested with the TV you didn't even sense my presence. Naruto grumbled a bit before he shook his head. It's fine Yasaka-chan, it was my own fault anyway. He leaned back into the couch before stiffening as Yasaka rested her head on his shoulder. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye to see her join in on the movie he was watching. So they don't have things like these where you are from? He heard her ask, clearly indicating the television. Naruto breathed in her scent as he found himself growing more comfortable with her next to him. We do, but those are really outdated compared to this one. It's also only used by daimyos or important figures, and we have nothing like the stuff they are showing on television here. Yasaka hummed as she shifted her body in a more comfortable position. She was now resting her body weight against him, though her head was still resting on his kimono-clad shoulder. Say Yasaka, if you have some free time soon, you think you can help me with some training? I promise it's nothing destructive like earlier today. Does it have to be me? He nodded. Yeah, it has to do with certain kitsune abilities. I guess I can free up some time for you. Can you explain what exactly you need help with? She felt him nod. Sure, I need help with controlling my foxfire. I was able to conjure up the flames, but after a few seconds they disappear. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong despite my attempts. Yasaka could clearly hear the frustration in his voice as he told her. I think I know what you're doing wrong. But don't worry, I'll free up some space in my schedule just for you. She said, getting a small blush from her fellow kitsune yokai. Anything else? Yup, I have all kinds of crazy ideas for attack, however they all involve my tails. Unfortunately I'm not really good when it comes to controlling them, as you might know. I can somewhat move them around, but I can't really grab anything with them. It's not funny. He whined upon hearing her laugh. I'm sorry, but it kind of is. She replied between giggles. Naruto clicked his tongue before focusing back on the movie he was watching before Yasaka's arrival. Seeing he wasn't going to retort, Yasaka joined in while keeping quiet. MHMYAWN, that was more interesting than I thought. Yasaka drawled once the movie was over. Removing her head from his shoulder, she straightened herself while stretching her arms. I'm going to bed. Good night Naruto-kun, see you in the morning. She leaned over and he froze as he felt her lips touch his cheek. Without any further ado, Yasaka stood up before shuffling out of the living room. Meanwhile, Naruto still sat on the couch, frozen as his mind went over what just happened. Slowly his eye began to twitch as he was assaulted by the laughter of the Biju inside of him. Haha. Didn't expect that, didn't you, Gaki? Hahaha. Shut up. He yelled at the massive entity, who quieted down to mere snickering. I mean what just happened. Seems like someone is interested in you, Naruto. Question is, what are you going to do? Naruto racked his brain at the question the Biju presented him. What was he going to do? Well, he would admit he liked Yasaka, after all, what was there not to like about her? She was beautiful, strong and a kitsune yokai much like him. She has been nothing but kind from the moment he had arrived here, and more helpful than anyone in his life had been before. The problem, however, lay with the fact that he had only known her for 2 months. He wasn't sure if that was enough to get a good idea of what kind of person Yasaka was. At the moment she was a loving, caring and strong woman, but was that all that there was to her? He didn't know. He was also much younger than she was. By how much he didn't know, though. With the apparent lifespan yokai had, that wasn't really anything bad. Shinobi back home regularly hooked up with those older than them, and that was okay. Yes, his lifespan due to it, he knew he could never get into a relationship with any woman back home as he would outlive them, and he wasn't sure if he could handle that. Though, the last time he checked he wasn't sure someone was even interested in him in the first place. The crush he used to have on Sakura had completely disappeared during his travels with Jiraiya, and he was able to look back how she treated him. And now he had to deal with Yasaka, though he was still not completely sure of her feelings towards him. He would give it some more time, there was no need to hurry. He doubted there was a possible way home, and even if it did he had all the time in the world. Yasaka watched as the door leading to her office was opened and Naruto entered carrying a stack of papers. She allowed herself a small smile as he made his way over to her. Anything to get a break from the boring office work she was busy doing was worth it to her. "Morning, Yasaka-chan." Naruto happily greeted the blonde kitsune before placing the stack of papers on her desk. "Someone asked me if I could bring these to you, and I thought why not." Yasaka looked at the papers he dropped off before sighing softly as she read what they were for. "Thank you, Naruto-kun." She spoke softly as she looked at her fellow blonde, who had his yakai features free to see as his tail swayed softly back and forth. "No problem, I have nothing to do myself, and since I can't train I figured I might as well spend some time here with you." He scratched his cheek before sitting down on the empty chair that was situated in front of her desk. "Paperwork, huh?" He mumbled as he spared the papers a couple glances. Yasaka nodded her head as she understood where he was coming from. "Correct, it's some of the less enjoyable parts that come with the job." He watched as she stamped a couple of papers before neatly placing them in a separate folder. "Oh, watch." Hearing him, Yasaka looked up and saw him hold his hand out. Before she could question him on what he was doing, a small yet dense blue flame flickered in existence in the palm of his hand. "I managed to get the basics down yesterday, but forgot to tell you about it. Thank you though, as I doubt I could have done it without you." He flashed her a bright smile. A slight flush dusted her cheeks at his words. He had been the first person she had personally taught and initially was somewhat afraid she wouldn't make a good teacher. But now seeing him performing the first step of Kitsune Bai, a standard attack any Kitsune Yaokai was capable of, and hearing him express his gratitude felt really nice. "Hey brat, aren't you going to ask her?" Naruto felt his eye twitch as he listened to Kyuubi talk to him before focusing back to Yasaka and saw she had returned to stamping papers. "I will, just give me a bit, okay?" He heard the Bijuu scoff and rolled his eyes before trying to calm his nerves. Damn, he never felt his nervous before, not even during the Chunin exams when he was fighting Niji, as he looked down and could see his hands trembling slightly. He closed his eyes as he took a few calming breaths to ease his nerves before his eyes opened. "Say, Yasaka." She looked up to see him fidget a bit in his seat, which was surprising as he usually had this confident aura surrounding him. Do you perhaps want to togoot with Meta Knight?" He quickly finished as he averted his eyes. Still looking at him, Yasaka blinked once, then twice as finally his words hit her. Naruto slowly moved his eyes back to Yasaka, who had been silent the moment he finished speaking, and watched as slowly a beautiful smile formed on her face before their eyes met. Naruto could hear his heartbeat loudly inside of his chest. He was surprised Yasaka hadn't noticed. "Are you asking me out?" Her voice was soft, like silk as it reached his ears, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. "Why yes. If you want to, that is, if possible." Her smile got even brighter as her presence made itself known as a warmth washed over him. Flashing him a smile, she answered. "I would love to." And Naruto beamed. "Think this looks good enough?" Naruto said as he stood in front of a mirror and ran a hand through his ever so fatefully spiky blonde locks. Honestly, Naruto wondered if it was even possible for him to change hairstyles, as whatever he tried his hair would always regain its spikiness. It didn't matter if he just came out of the shower or not, as with a simple sweep of his hand, it was back the way it was, like it never changed at all. He moved his hands downwards and adjusted the high collar kimono he had bought earlier today. It was white with small yellow suns adorned just below the collar. It was held together by a black sash. He didn't wear anything underneath it, allowing his neck and a bit of his chest to be seen. "Damn, I look good," he mumbled as he gave himself another look over. He was surprised himself just how much a change of clothes would do for his appearance, but now that he actually paid attention, he just appeared much more mature. Satisfied with how he looked, he turned around and exited his room only for his eyes to widen as he laid his eyes on Yasaka, who was standing on the opposite side. Naruto allowed his eyes to travel over her form as Yasaka was clad in a beautiful red and white kimono that hugged her body quite nicely, as he could see the curves she had with a single glance. Small foxes adorned the sleeves of her kimono that was held together by a fitting red sash. Moving upwards, her golden blonde hair was pulled in a beautiful braid, with a few strands framing the side of her face, as her expression held a kind smile. All in all, she was the epitome of beauty to him. "You look amazing." Naruto breathed out as he finally rested his gaze on her eyes. Yasaka laughed softly. "You look handsome as well, Naruto-kun." Her words elicited a blush out of him as he wasn't used to receiving compliments at all. Shaking his head lightly, he held his arm out for her to take, which she did as she intertwined it with her own before the two made their way to the front door. As the two walked through the streets of Kyoto, Naruto couldn't help but smile as he glanced at his date from the corner of his eye. Yasaka was holding his arm with her own while leaning against him as he led her to a restaurant he had put a reservation in. Yasaka hummed softly as she allowed Naruto to lead her through the busy streets. She took in the looks of surprise from several yokai whom recognized her, though she paid them no mind. No, Yasaka was feeling excited and was very much looking forward to this date she was having with her fellow kitsune yokai. Despite herself being older than him by quite a bit, she had no issue with age as she could live for quite a while, and she assumed he didn't either or else he wouldn't have bothered asking her out. Moving her head a bit she gazed up and saw the smile he wore and she increased the hold she had on his arm. Even though she only knew him for little over 2 months she truly had come to like him. She had spent almost all of her time with him during his stay and slowly her feelings had changed from friends to a potential mate. She had tested the water so to speak by kissing him on the cheek a little over a week ago when they had watched a movie together. It was just a simple kiss on the cheek to see what his reaction to it was going to be and she was secretly pleased that it had led him asking her out. Here we are. His voice brought her back to reality as they stood outside a small restaurant. She recognized it as one of the more expansive ones Kyoto has to offer and actually wondered how he managed to get a reservation in as last time she heard it was completely booked for at least a few months in advance. As if sensing her thoughts Naruto smirked before leading her inside. Upon entering Yasaka let her eyes travel the inside of the restaurant after realizing she had never been here before. While Yasaka was looking around Naruto watched as a young woman made her way towards them. He saw her looking at him with a light blush on her cheeks before her eyes widened as she recognized the person holding his arm. The young woman swallowed once before addressing the blonde male. Reservation. Naruto nodded his head. Yes, it should be under Uzumaki, a table for 2. The woman's eyes lit up with recognition. Ah, you're the one the owner told me to look out for. Very well, follow me then. Naruto lightly nudged Yasaka getting her attention before motioning her to follow after the woman walking a few steps in front of them. She led the pair to one of the corners of the restaurant where preparations for 2 had been made. Remembering some dating etiquette he had read earlier this week, Naruto moved up in front and pulled a chair back for her to sit on and receiving a thank you in response. He then pushed it closer to the table now that Yasaka was seated before sitting himself down on the opposite side of her. This is quite nice. She mumbled before resting her gaze on her date. Naruto smiled. Glad you like it. They were interrupted as the same woman from before walked up to their table carrying 2 menus which she handed out to either of them. I'd like a small plate of sushi to start things off. Naruto told the waitress who waited patiently and wrote down the order before looking at Yasaka. Humming softly as she looked the menu over, she decided to order the same as he did as it made for a great appetizer. Would you like something to drink while waiting? Yes, Naruto nodded. We'd like a bottle of ginjamshu for 2 please. Yasaka sent him a small smile at the mention of her favorite sake which he returned. He was thankful that the changes that had happened to his body made him look a bit older than he did before or else there was no way he'd be able to get away with ordering alcohol like that. It would also look weird to see Yasaka, Kyoto's leader, walk arm in arm with a 16-year-old. Mainly to humans at least as yokai were largely unconcerned with age, as long as the other wasn't a young child of course. Though him being a kitsune yokai and eventually ending up as a kyuubi himself might have resulted in some biased answers he had received. Soon the waitress returned carrying a tray holding 2 small cups with the requested bottle of sake next to them. They thanked the woman who left as Yasaka filled both their cups. They clashed their small cups before they both downed it in a single take. Soon thereafter their food was served. Throughout the evening Naruto kept Yasaka entertained as he retold her several stories regarding missions he had gone on when he was younger. From saving countries to rescuing princesses nothing was out of the ordinary for what he had experienced. Soft giggling could be from Yasaka as she and Naruto left the restaurant. It had gotten dark outside as stars twinkled in the night sky. Regardless of that though plenty of people could still be seen outside and Naruto wasn't ready to call it a night yet. He grabbed Yasaka's hand and pulled her close as she was a tad bit tipsy from the amount of sake she had consumed. Thankfully, Naruto still had the Biju inside of him who was capable of filtering the worst effects of the amount of alcohol he drank. He softly tugged on Yasaka's hand, causing her to collide against him, as if she weighed nothing. What's the matter? Naruto suppressed a shiver threatening to appear as he felt her breath come in contact with his neck. Shaking his head to get rid of any perverse thoughts he moved so that she was standing at his side and allowed one of his arms to curl around her and rest on her hip. Yasaka didn't seem to mind as she moved herself a bit closer to him, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. Giving her a glance and seeing she was pleased by the closeness between the two they began to walk. Earlier today Naruto had mapped out a decently sized path that started from the restaurant they had just left back to Yasaka's home, which involved one of the more pretty looking parks Kyoto had. It was also the perfect weather as moonlight shone down on them between the branches above them, giving the forest an ethereal beauty that seemed to be out of this world. As they walked they saw all kinds of animals scurrying around them. Yasaka cooed softly as a small family of foxes walked past them. They spared them a glance before one of them nipped at Yasaka's ankles before running along with the other two quickly following behind. Tempting his luck, Naruto moved the hand that rested on her hip downwards until it made contact with her shapely behind. "Nice going, brat." He heard the Biju cheer him on from inside of him. It was the first time he had heard from him since the evening. Naruto cautiously looked at Yasaka's face to see if he had overstepped his boundaries. He was once again surprised as he spotted the small smile she wore, making it evident that she knew what he was doing but didn't put any effort in stopping him. "I think I have a dead wish." Naruto internally mused as he gave her ass a soft squeeze. Naruto, be careful what you're wishing for, she mumbled. They had stopped walking as Yasaka had buried her face against his neck. Her words sending pleasurable sensations down his spine as his free hand came up and started combing through parts of her hair that wasn't constricted by her braid. "Oh? And what might that be?" he teasingly asked as the hand he had running through her hair moved away as he cupped her cheek. His eyes taking every little detail her face held before coming to rest on her pink, supple and kissable lips. Looking up, her golden eyes met his blue ones which stared right back at her. Due to the close proximity she could feel his heart thump in his chest, which wasn't much different of her own erratic heartbeat. "See, can I?" she barely heard him whisper as she felt his fingers trace circles on her cheek. Smiling softly, her own hands moved up, wrapping around his neck and slowly bringing his face down to meet hers. A soft, almost unnoticeable moan escaped Yasaka as her lips made contact with his as her eyes fluttered close. Naruto's own eyes widened at Yasaka's straightforward action before they too closed slowly. He could hear the Biju inside of him yelling all kinds of praises but paid him no mind. No, his attention was solely on the beautiful woman he was holding and in a lip lock with. He felt an overwhelming amount of emotions racing through him the longer their lips were locked together and unconsciously pressed her a bit closer to himself. This kiss was much better than the accidental one he had with Sasuke back in the academy, one he would rather forget. The fact that it was with this bombshell of a vixen who held unparalleled beauty made it even better. Yes, to Naruto this was his first official kiss. Eventually, and much to both their displeasure, the need to breathe arose and their lips disconnected from each other. Nevertheless, Yasaka and Naruto rested their foreheads against each other, both panting lightly as a small blush adorned both their cheeks. "That was amazing." Naruto breathed out softly after regaining his breath. Yasaka nodded her head in agreement, unable to find the proper words to describe the euphoria that had washed over her the moment their lips met. More. Yasaka wanted more, to feel and taste his lips once more. And so she did. Naruto was surprised. Deciding to change things up a bit, she prodded his lips with her tongue, earning an audible gasp from the younger blonde who parted his lips. She used the opportunity and slipped her tongue inside and smirked inwardly, and the pleased groans he was releasing as she explored his oral cavity. A minute later and Yasaka was the one to break the kiss, a thin strand of saliva connecting their mouths together and leaving behind a slightly dazed Naruto. "You know, I've been wanting to do this for quite a while," she said after a moment of basking in silence, the only sounds being from the leaves that rustled from the wind. Naruto snapped out of his dazed state as he realized just what had happened. His own tongue traced over his now moist lips before leaning down and pressed his lips against the side of her head, making her hum. Leaning his head back, he began to chuckle, earning him a confused look from Yasaka. "Heh, from all the things I expected that would happen since I arrived here, I can safely say that this isn't one of them." Hearing his words, Yasaka let out a chuckle of her own before resting her head against his chest. "I don't see you complaining." "Why would I? I feel happier than I ever been. Yes, the fact that I'm slowly turning into a yokai was quite something to handle when I first received the news. But when I laid my eyes on you, with your features free for me to see, I knew it wasn't as bad as it could have been. And now here I am, embracing the same beautiful woman who had helped me out the most and reciprocates these feelings I have for you." He sighed softly as his hands ran up and down her back. "I don't think I could be any happier than I am now, really." They stayed like this for a moment, neither knowing how long exactly before Yasaka removed herself out of his grasp, though she kept their hands connected. "Let's head home, it's been a long evening and we can discuss our new relationship tomorrow." Naruto nodded his head in agreement to her words as he wordlessly began to walk. This has been one of the better if not outright best day in his short life, and he couldn't help but look forward to what the future had to offer. "Any news on the Kyuubi Jinchuriki?" A deep male voice spoke up from his left. Ringed eyes zeroed in on the owner of the voice. A single Sharingan eye meeting his own gaze from behind the orange mask he wore. No. Even Zetsu had been unable to find any trace of the boy. "Madara-sama, what if the reports are true? The ones that claim he had been swallowed up by a dimensional tear." "Yes, what if?" Madara hummed as he scratched his mask. "If true, it's a very concerning matter." Though dimensional travel isn't new, shinobi in the past having devised techniques surrounding it. A good example would be Tobirama's Hiraishin, which was later perfected by the Yondaime Hokage himself, which involves the user entering a separate dimension to instantly travel to the Hiraishin tags. There was even evidence back during the warring era of dimension travel dating back as far as the time Rikido Sennin was alive. Pain listened to Madara's words before he spoke. So what is our next step? Without the Kyuubi we can't complete our goal. Madara crossed his arms. Chan, keep collecting the beasts. I'll have Zetsu scout the nation, for all we know this could be an elaborate ploy by Konoha to keep us away from their Jinchuriki. While you will be doing that I'll look into the possibility of other dimensions myself. If worst comes to worst we don't need the complete Kyuubi, and Zetsu reported that there's a boy holding enough of Kyuubi's chakra located at Hai no Kuni's fire temple. We can always grab him as nobody would miss him. Very well, I'll inform the others in the next meeting. The masked man calling himself Madara nodded before his body was sucked into his eye, leaving pain behind. His purple ringed pattern eyes gazed solemnly over a megacure as it continuously rained. Soon, peace will become a reality. Rays of sunlight peering down from the large window belonging to the room he was in was the cause for Naruto's eyes to flutter open before closing quickly as it directly met his eyes. Moving his head slightly to the side he tried again and this time wasn't met with anything shining directly into his eyes. The soft feminine groan met his ears and he quickly looked down only to meet a tuft of blonde hair accompanied by a pair of fox ears that twitched ever so slightly. His first reaction was for his eyes to widen before quickly calming down as he could feel that both were still wearing clothes, the same one as they wore yesterday evening to be more specific. Ah, I remember she didn't want to let go of me, so we ended up sleeping here, together. Naruto mused much calmer than he himself had expected. Though he moved some bangs to the side, watching as soft snores escaped her mouth. She's really cute like this. Brat. Naruto. Yes. Naruto finally responded, aware of the Bijuu's twitching eye. Well done Naruto. Naruto flinched at the thunderous voice belonging to the Bijuu echoing his mind. You've surprised me boy. I never imagined you had it in you. I thought that by now you knew I'm not the same boy I was back then. I can act more like myself, no need putting up a mask of a loud mad idiot. His attention went to his sleeping companion who seemed to be waking up. Still, I can get used to this. Yasaka groaned as she slowly woke up, her body unconsciously moving closer to the source of warmth she was feeling. Pressing herself closer her eyebrows furrowed as her ears picked up muffled groans before her eyes blinked open. Good morning Yasaka-chan. She sleepily raised an eyebrow as her slitted golden eyes met cerulean blue ones before she quickly sat up after realizing she was in the same bed as him. Relief spread through her as she noticed both were still clothed in the same outfit they had worn the previous night. A smile of unbridled joy formed on her face as memories of last night flashed through her mind. While they were a couple or at least more than just friends, she didn't want to consummate their relationship just yet. Sleeping in the same bed as him was fine as she honestly enjoyed his presence so close to her and she knew he wouldn't try anything she wasn't quite ready for. He just didn't seem like the type. Yawning, Yasaka stretched out her arms, unaware that she was now straddling him as he just looked on. Once done she leaned down and pecked him on his lips, surprising him. Good morning Naruto-kun. She rested her body on top of his, her tail swaying lazily behind her as he ran his hand up and down her back. Naruto took a deep breath, inhaling her scent and humming softly at how peaceful this moment was. Say Naruto-kun. She propped herself up as she looked up. As much as I'd like to stay like this forever I'm quite hungry and I guess you are too. She saw him nod and continued. So how about I prepare us some breakfast before we're going to start the day. I'll be helping you with the next step of Kitsune Bai. Naruto's eyes lit up with interest in progressing with his fox fire as he knew he had barely scratched the surface with that specific ability and receiving personal training from Yasaka was more than anyone else got. She was the expert and nobody could teach him better than her. He sat up and cupped both her cheeks before planting one last kiss on the blonde vixen's lips. I second that idea. Good. She got off of the bed and walked towards the door. Stopping right in front of it, she turned her head to see him staring at her behind and shook her head. Don't be late or else I'll eat both our breakfast. She warned him before leaving the room. Staring at the now empty spot Yasaka previously occupied Naruto sighed blissfully before falling back onto the bed with a large smile etched on his face. That woman she really is something else. PHRK. Spittle escaped his mouth as once again a first impacted his stomach. Eyes threatened to roll into the back of his head and he fought down the urge to vomit as he was hit harder than he had ever been in his life. As he fought to keep his consciousness his body impacted the ground before continuing to skid across the grass for several feet. Naruto laid there for a moment as he slowly regained his breath, his eyes staring upwards at the clear blue sky. Come on Naruto-kun, I know that wasn't enough to take you out. Naruto could only groan as he shifted his head to see Yasaka standing a couple feet away from him. Her blonde hair was pulled into a ponytail, while her outfit consisted of form-fitting track pants and a matching sports bra, which was quite distracting with the size of her chest. Thankfully they were on one of her private training grounds, which meant only he was able to see her like this. Her ears and tails were free for him to see as she was currently training him in the use of his own tails. It started off quite easy with him only allowed to swat away her punches with his own tails. The minute her own tails came into play though along with the increase of her speed ferocity was when things spiraled down, as instead of blocking, he had switched over to dodging as he saw the crater that appeared when one of her tails made impact with the ground. Yeah, Naruto was not looking forward to be on the receiving end of that more than absolutely necessary. From where she was standing Yasaka watched, pleased as Naruto groggily got to his feet. The last blow she had hit him with was more than enough to knock out weaker yokai and she was somewhat surprised to see him stand. Despite Naruto having only 3 tails she had quickly sensed a big difference between him and herself. The potency of his chakra was much higher than her own to the point that his 3-tailed state was more than capable of keeping up with 5-tailed kitsune yokai. It was the reason she was quite rough on him as he had also shown he had a high pain threshold. She was satisfied however with how his training progressed as he seemed to be a very quick learner when it comes to practical stuff it is, soaking up her training like a sponge did water which made it a lot more enjoyable to teach him. Though a part of her also liked beating him around as she could practically feel the potential he had in him. Hey alright, let's continue. Came Naruto's voice as he shook his head to clear any remnants of dizziness. Yasaka didn't reply as she kept her eyes on him, even now as they stood she could see his wounds already starting to disappear, though it didn't help getting rid of the fatigue he felt which she used to her advantage as she bolted from her spot. Naruto barely had time to widen his eyes as he commanded one of his tails to move in front of him as Yasaka seemingly teleported while sending a chakra-covered fist his way. He grunted softly as his tail absorbed the impact but could feel the force belonging to her fist as his hair fluttered in the wind generated by their contact. Narrowing his eyes at her he lashed out with his other tails which she swiftly blocked with her own. She did it with such practiced ease she was able to simultaneously block while sending 2 punches at him. He managed to block the first one, but the second punch bypassed his defense and hit him just below his right shoulder. Thankfully he managed to move his body to lessen the damage, though it didn't stop him from wincing as he was sent skidding back half a feet. This was unreal. Yasaka's strength surpassed anyone he had fought before by insane amounts. Even when he was a younger and had first met Jiraiya the first time did he not feel this outclassed against his opponent. Even Orochimaru in the Forest of Death wasn't compared to the beatdown he was receiving. It was a scary thought as Naruto knew that Yasaka was far stronger than any person back in the elemental nations. Even now with him having gained a large upgrade in the form of massively larger chakra pools and amplified strength capable of shattering boulders with ease, she still was able to block his attack with little to no issue. It was quite concerning especially since she had told him there were beings alive that were massively stronger than she was. Devils were the first ones, she had told him each of the 4 Satans was capable of destroying Japan if they truly wished to do so. She had also told him what his power was compared to devils. It was higher than high-class devils, especially his speed which, if he went all out could even catch her off guard. He wasn't as strong as ultimate-class devils strength-wise yet though. While his Bijuadama could wipe small mountains off the map, he didn't really have any other attacks in that range. Yasaka herself was on the higher end of ultimate class if she were to go all out. Though she did tell him that if he would get his 7th or 8th tail his power should match her own. He was knocked out of his thoughts, literally, as one of her tails smacked the side of his face and sending him rocketing to the side. His body came to stop as it impacted a tree and he could feel his ribs crack from the force. The sound of footsteps nearing him gained his attention as he slowly managed to roll himself onto his back, wincing ever so slightly due to the pressure his ribs endured. A relieved sigh escaped his lips as he felt something warm envelop his damaged ribs. Turning to the source he saw Yasaka who had gotten to a seize position while one of her hands was placed on the spot it hurt the most as she healed him. "Thank you," he rasped as he could feel the pain disappear. Despite that though Naruto didn't move, opting to lie where he was underneath the shade provided by the tree Yasaka had sent him into. Naruto raised an eyebrow as a sudden weight joined him. He glanced downwards to see Yasaka laying next to him, or against him to be more precise. One of her arms sprawled across his chest, the shirt he wore nothing more than a couple tatters hanging together on some strands. Feeling something soft touch his cheek he looked to the side, only to come face to face with one of her tails which kept on tapping his cheek. Understanding what she indirectly was asking he raised his head just enough so it could come to rest beneath his head. Like a pillow, a very, very soft pillow. He moved his own hand and began running it through her blonde tresses, which even now still looked as good as they did before the one-sided beatdown that she had delivered him. "Hey Naru." Yasaka began, her hand rubbing circles on his stomach as she heard him hum. "Do you have any family left back where you are from?" Naruto stopped his hands for a moment, making her wonder if the question was too personal before she felt him continue. "No, I'm an orphan. I don't even know who my parents are, though I have somewhat of an idea who my father is after having seen various pictures. Yet, when I asked the person who should know them, someone similar to a village leader, I was told he didn't know. The only thing I was told that they died the night when the Kyuubi had attacked Konoha." "I see. What about grandparents? Who raised you?" Naruto chuckled. "Heh, I raised myself mostly. I was kicked out of the orphanage when I was 5, or was it 4? He mused to himself before he shook his head. "Anyway, shortly after I was kicked out, the Hokage, who I told you holds a similar position as yourself, gave me my own apartment." Looking back, no, I wondered what the man was thinking, letting a 4-year-old boy live inside an apartment all by himself. As he finished speaking, he felt Yasaka move. She twisted her body so she was now laying directly on top of him, her eyes peering into his own before leaning down as she captured his lips in between her own. "I'm sorry for bringing up bad memories." She spoke softly, her lips hovering just above his own. "It's fine really," he flashed her a smile. "Over time I got used to it, you know. The loneliness I endured during my childhood. I'm just glad I turned out alright after all that happened." "Me too." Yasaka giggled as he pulled her closer, their bodies smashed against another, not that she minded in the slightest. The two stayed in this position for an unspecified amount of time, neither doing much aside from basking in the other's presence. It was rather interesting for Yasaka. She found herself acting more and more like a love-struck teenager the more time she spent with him. She even felt herself a lot less happy the longer she was away from him, leading the two to be seen together whenever the other had business to attend in parts of Kyoto. "Ugh," Yasaka sighed in annoyance before she sat back up. Naruto looked at her, confused what caused the sudden change in her mood. "We have to return to Kyoto, Naruto-kun. I have an appointment soon with one of the clans that I can't afford to miss." "Ah." Naruto breathed as he propped himself up using his elbows. He watched as the blonde vixen stood up before walking a few feet to the side, where 2 neatly folded kimonos could be seen laying on the ground, untouched by everything that had happened. With a small groan, he stood up as well, watching as Yasaka put on the kimono to hide her appearance for eyes other than his, before making her way over to him and handing the other kimono over. He accepted with a smile, putting it on and securing the obi to obscure the shirt he wore underneath. Yasaka held her arm out with a smile, waiting for him to lock his arm with hers. She didn't have to wait long as she felt him intertwine their arms. Moving a bit closer to him like she usually did, the two left the training ground as they headed towards Kyoto. Naruto hummed softly as he stared at the ceiling. It was night and he was currently in the bedroom, Yasaka's bedroom to be more precise. Laying on the bed, a bed that was really soft. Not in an uncomfortable way though. No, if anything it was more comfortable than anything he had felt in his life, even the guest room Yasaka had offered him paled in comparison. His arms lie limply to his sides, his fingers trailing the covers beneath him, unbothered as his eyes stayed focused on the ceiling. It had been a little over a week since he had taken Yasaka out on a date and subsequently had made out with a woman and ending up spending the night together in a non-sexual way. Yasaka had surprised him when the next day she had practically asked, more like ordered him to sleep with her in her room, again not in a perverse way. Just so that they could be close to the other, as apparently she too had slept better that night than she had before. He didn't decline, of course. He liked Yasaka and very much enjoyed the warmth her body generated when they were sleeping, her being somewhat of a cuddler only helped. The bathroom door leading to the bedroom attached to the room clicked open, the sound reaching his ears as he turned and looked. His breath was caught in his throat as his eyes landed on the scene provided to him. There, standing at the foot of the bed wearing nothing but some very skimpy nightwear, was Yasaka. A light blush adorned her cheeks as she gazed at him with half-lidded eyes that made him feel more self-conscious than he already was. "Naruto," she breathed out his name, and Naruto had to swallow at how seductive it sounded. "Why yes?" Naruto asked as he did his best to maintain eye contact, something that was a lot harder than he thought it'd be, as his eyes unconsciously kept moving downwards. He could feel himself heating up as by now he was sitting straight up with his back against the headboard. He moved around the shorts he was wearing as he had rising matters to deal with. He swallowed audibly once more as Yasaka knelt on her bed, her golden blonde hair flowing behind her. He tried to back up, an action that proved futile as she crawled over to him and successfully straddled him legs. Up close he was able to see she seemed as nervous about this as he was, something that made him feel strangely comfortable before she took one of his hands and placed it above her, where her heart was located. "Can you feel it?" she whispered throatily. He nodded. He could feel her heartbeat, it having a pace similar to his own. Even now as his blue eyes were locked with her golden ones. His pupils staring at her slitted ones that stared at him with so much lust Naruto found it hard to do anything other than breath. He didn't even notice that he had placed his other hand on her thigh, so enthralled he was by her that such things went by unnoticed. You've captured my heart, Naruto-kun. I don't know how you did it, but somehow you did. This feeling I have when I'm close to you or the pain I feel when you're away. I tried to deny it at first, telling myself it couldn't be what I thought it was as we've only known each other for a short amount of time. But that night, when we kissed I knew I could no longer deny my feelings for you. Naruto said nothing as he let Yasaka speak, the hand on her thigh having began to massage the area. I love you Naruto-kun, and I want to cement our relationship. So, she leaned forwards and pressed her lips against his, her tongue probing for entry which he granted. After a minute she broke the kiss, her face hovering an inch or two in front of his as her cheeks were flushed. Take me, please. Naruto kept his eyes on her, even as he registered her words. For a moment Yasaka wondered if she made a mistake with how direct she was as he had told her he had no prior experience with the opposite sex before meeting her. Thankfully her worries were put to rest as she let out a squeal upon feeling both his hands coming to rest on her cheeks before she was turned around. Are you sure? He whispered huskily and she licked her lips before nodding her head. She could tell he was nervous and did her best to ease his mind as one of her hands rested on his cheek, her thumb tracing the faint whisker marks his face held. Naruto closed his eyes for a brief moment, clearing his mind of any thoughts before snapping them open and initiating a very sensual kiss that caught her off guard. She was quickly able to catch herself though before reciprocating in kind as the rest of the night passed by as a pleasant and very satisfying memory for both of them. Naruto stared at the space above him. His hand rubbing up and down Yasaka's naked back as her head rested on his chest. She had fallen asleep little over 15 minutes ago, more satisfied than she had been her entire life. He wiped away a few strands of hair that seemed to bother her, judging by how her face was scrunching up. A small smile formed on her face as he did so as she unconsciously snuggled closer against him. As he kept watching her realization hit him that he was no longer a virgin. He had actual sex with a bombshell of a woman who was very much in love with him, and he likewise with her. Love, such an interesting feeling it was, knowing somebody could care about you this much. It was moments like these he was glad of his decision of jumping into that Tira's space. And also that he was the only one as well. Dear God, he could already imagine Jiraiya's reaction upon knowing what had transpired between him and Yasaka. He shuddered as he could hear the man's perverted giggling already. It would probably be some sort of mix between proud and jealous. Proud for the fact that he managed to hook up with a woman such as Yasaka. Yet, at the same time the perverted toad would be quite jealous for him hooking up with someone like her. That, and he would no doubt end up embarrassing him the worst way possible. Not to mention that there would be a chance their lovemaking would end up in one of his disgusting little books. While Naruto now understood why the man kept rambling on about regarding the pleasure of flesh, there is a limit about what you should and should not say out loud. Naruto was quite proud of himself for denying each and every offer Jiraiya had made for him to lose his V-card in one of the many brothels they had passed during their 3 years away from Konoha. While it was initially kind of awkward, especially as he was very nervous doing anything other than making out with her. Yasaka had been more than helpful and understanding with his inexperience and didn't hold it against him. If anything she seemed pleased that she was going to be his first and most likely, only as she tired him out real good. Her stamina was as ridiculous as his own, in a good way though. His thoughts moved away from what he and Yasaka had done and began focusing on the future. More importantly Konoha. Naruto knew that without a doubt they were trying everything to get him back to them. Some because he, according to them, belonged there and was their friend. That it was his home and duty as shinobi of Konoha to protect the village against any and all threats. Whereas others had much more selfish reasons. Naruto didn't doubt that Danzo was throwing a temper tantrum to Tsunade. Most likely blaming the third Hokage that they wouldn't have lost their Jinchuriki had he been given to the man himself. That man was such a hypocrite Naruto didn't even know where to begin. He remembered the third Hokage telling him to keep away from him when he was younger, one of the few useful pieces of advice the man had given him between the other bullshit he often spouted. Even now Naruto still held a small amount of dislike for how he manipulated him. Naruto understood that it was required of the Hokage to do what was best for the village, manipulating young, influential children not an exception. Yeah, his dream of becoming Hokage had become less and less the longer he was away from Konoha to where it wasn't even on his mind when he had returned. Becoming Hokage was a dream of his younger, naive self. One that could be manipulated by any person that would have been willing to show him some kindness. It was just that the third Hokage was the only one to notice. Perhaps Danzo did as well, which was why he was told not to trust a word coming from the man's mouth. Regardless, the point is that the third seemed to be one of the few to notice how he craved any sort of affection and took advantage of his situation. Thinking of his younger self made him shake his head. How did he ever thought that becoming Hokage was the fastest path to becoming liked by the village? Was he too stupid to realize that in order to become nominated for Hokage in the first place you need to have the village's approval? It wasn't like their glares and scowls would magically turn into smiles all of a sudden. But enough of that. He sighed deeply to rid any lingering thoughts, he just hoped he could live the rest of his long life here, away from Akatsuki. He heard the Bijuu growl in agreement, momentarily catching him off guard as it was the first time he had heard him this evening. "You've been quiet." The Bijuu snorted. "Of course I have, not like you would have heard me or anything since you were busy with that blonde vixen. Nice job by the way, if I didn't catch the first couple minutes I would have thought you were a natural." Naruto blushed at the casual way the Bijuu implied he was watching. Had it not been for the fact that he recently had sex and a naked kitsune woman snuggled to his side, Naruto was sure he would have reacted quite loudly, but right now he felt quite shameless and just gave a mental shrug. "Hope you enjoyed." "I did, it was quite interesting to see firsthand. I wonder if they all scream like that one." "DCH, shut up you stupid fox." His eye twitched as he could hear his laughter echo his mind. "But seriously brat, nicely done. She's quite the looker compared to the little girls wandering around in Konoha. If I actually cared about you, I would have said that I'm proud." "Thank you," Naruto replied with a sweat drop running down the side of his head. "Anyway it's getting late, I'll talk to you tomorrow if you want that is." With that Naruto closed their mental connection. Giving Yasaka sleeping for another glance he too began to doze off to the land of dreams. Naruto woke up as he felt something or rather someone missing. His eyes fluttering open before lazily looking to his side, a small frown formed as saw that Yasaka was not there. The smell of food reached its way to his nose and he turned his head to see that the bedroom door was open. Understanding what that meant he pulled the covers away, sucking in a breath as fresh air washed over his still nude body. With a soft sigh he got out of bed, smiling as he noticed a neatly folded kimono placed on the dresser in the room. Walking over he put the kimono on, rolling his shoulders to loosen up the muscles in his arms before he exited the room. He made sure to open up a window as the room still smelled like sex. How he knew that Naruto wasn't sure himself aside from it having a peculiar scent. Satisfied he made his way towards the kitchen where he could tell the smell originated from. As he entered the kitchen he came upon the scene of a brightly smiling Yasaka who seemed to have some kind of glow surrounding her. He also took notice of the slight limp in her steps and patted himself on the back, proud of his achievement, especially since she had quite the healing factor herself. "Oh morning Naruto-kun." She chirped as she made her war over to him and pulled him in an embrace. Naruto immediately returned the hug, taking a deep breath and inhaling her scent. "Good morning to you as well Yasaka-chan. I see you've been busy." He looked at the table that was filled with freshly prepared food. "MMHM." She nodded her head. "I saw you were still sleeping, most likely tired from last night, and thought I would reward you for the very pleasurable night you gave me." She purred and he shivered as he felt her breath touch his skin. "I see that, looks very nice." He licked his lips as he was indeed quite hungry. Leaning a bit down he kissed her cheek making her hum from his touch. Trailing kisses upwards till he came in contact with her fox ears, he playfully nipped them, getting her to shudder as he felt her increase the grip she had on him. "Well a part of me wouldn't mind continuing our activities from last night, the need for food comes first unfortunately." "I know," she sighed as she broke their embrace, giving him a quick peck on the lips before moving to sit down. "Come on." She patted the empty chair next to hers. "I finished just before you came in." Naruto's eyes lit up and quicker than either had expected he was seated next to her, his plate full of all sorts of food Yasaka had prepared as he dug in. This is really good." He complimented her as he finished swallowing his bite. The rich taste overwhelmed his taste buds and he couldn't help but close his eyes and taste more. "Oh Naruto-kun," she spoke up and getting his attention. "Make sure to eat as much as you can, as today we will be continuing where we left off yesterday except this time I will use my fox fire on you." She smirked as she saw him pale and quickly refill his already half-empty plate. Sighing blissfully, Yasaka watched him eat with a smile while consuming her own food as well. She looked forward to what the future would bring, especially now she was no longer alone. The rhythmic sound of flesh meeting flesh echoed throughout the room. Accompanying those sounds were the soft yet sensual whimpers, along with husky moans filled with need. More Naruto-kun Yasaka whimpered each time she felt him fill her completely. Naruto didn't respond, not verbally at least. He increased the grip he had on her hips before thrusting upwards each time she came down. "Yes." She moaned as a shudder ran through her body. Naruto groaned softly as he felt her slick walls tighten around him, his eyes fixated on the side of her cheeks rippling each impact. Wanting to change things up a little, Naruto surprised her by leaning up, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her from moving, while his other hand came up and groped her. Yasaka whined softly as the hold he had on her and began wiggling in his grasp, successfully grinded their crotches together. She cooed softly as Naruto began kissing and nipping along her collarbone up to her neck before focusing on a single spot and began sucking on her skin. "I'm close." He growled into her ears as he detached himself from her neck, satisfied to see a hickey there. Turning her head, Yasaka smashed her lips against his in a hungry, lust-filled kiss. Caught off guard, it allowed her to push him back onto the bed before turning around, so she was now facing him. Naruto hissed softly at new yet pleasurable sensation he felt before resting his hands on her behind. Rolling her hips back and forth, it didn't take long for Yasaka to start bouncing in his lap. Naruto moved his gaze downwards from her lustful golden eyes to her swing, noticing where his eyes went. She smirked before using her own hands and began to grope herself. Feeling his end near, and hers too, judging by her convulsing inner walls, he moved his hands up slightly before pulling her down and initiating a passionate kiss while thrusting into her with an increased pace. Yasaka moaned into the kiss as she was close, very close to her end, and his thrust only making it easier. Giving her a couple more deep thrusts, Naruto sheathed himself inside of her completely as he came. Yasaka broke their kiss before burying her face in the crook of his neck as her walls clamped down on his member. The feeling of his warm seed triggering her own orgasm, and on reflex she bit his collarbone. Both Naruto and Yasaka panted as their orgasm tapered off. She didn't move, however, content with being where she was as she felt his hands rub up and down her back. Neither spoke for a moment, content with the silence that lingered the room. Naruto glanced downwards as he could feel her lay soft kisses on his neck and moved one hand up to run through her hair. Naruto released a deep breath as he could feel her inner walls clench around him due to still being inside of her. It was somewhat funny, really. It had been only a couple days since he had first lay with her and subsequently gotten rid of his V card. Somehow though, Yasaka had managed to coax him to have sex with her every night since then, sometimes even during the day. Well, it wasn't really hard for her in the first place. After all, he was technically still a teenager crazy on hormones. Adding a horny, beautiful vixen lusting after him, and it was only a matter of when he was going to give in. "Still want more?" Yasaka asked him softly upon feeling him harden inside of her. She knew even with her advanced healing, she was most likely going to end up sore in the morning. Though she wouldn't deny it wasn't worth it. "Huh? Oh, sorry, I was just remembering something." "I'm sure you did," Yasaka giggled softly before kissing his cheek. I was remembering a certain pleasurable event that happened in your office 2 days ago." Yasaka blushed, though with how they were positioned he wasn't able to see it. "Not like you didn't like it." He heard her mumble and chuckled. "How could I not? There's something strangely enticing about doing it in your office." He felt Yasaka sink her teeth in his neck in response, a soft hiss escaping his lips as she did so. Moving his hands down to her rear, he gently massaged the plump cheeks. Yasaka released a cute squeal as Naruto suddenly rolled her to the side, whimpering in disappointment as his member released itself from her confines. Both leaned forwards and captured the other's lips, Naruto groaning slightly as Yasaka nibbled on his upper lip. "Let's get some sleep, okay? We've an important event to attend tomorrow." Naruto raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? Didn't I tell you?" Yasaka blinked her eyes as Naruto shook his head. "Oh well, I'll explain to you when I'm not so tired." "Alright, I guess." Naruto leaned in to quickly peck her on the lips before pulling the covers over them. Yasaka snuggled into him, her head coming to rest underneath his chin. Naruto wrapped an arm around her before the two slowly drifted off to sleep. Whistling jovially, Naruto could be seen walking down the streets of Kyoto. He had just completed an assignment given to him by Yasaka, which had him deliver some important papers to one of the oldest yakai clans living in Kyoto. Unfortunately, Yasaka wasn't able to deliver them herself, as she was quite busy making preparations for the party that was being held later tonight. It was a party celebrating another year of her leadership, or so she explained to him. She had also told him he was going with her as her date as she didn't like going alone, and it would be a good way to introduce him to other important members of Kyoto, or people and yakai alike in general. So here he was walking back to his current residence after having successfully handed over the papers of much importance. Though they did look a bit skeptical when he had appeared before them, a quick show of his kitsune tails and ears was enough to get rid of any suspicion. That, along with the official stamp that was visible on the papers to see which was only accessible by Yasaka herself, made it all the easier. He exited his thoughts as his senses warned him off potential danger. Just in time too, as he was able to stop himself from bumping into the person who stood in front of him, his own blue eyes meeting brown ones which stared at him with a mixture of intrigue coupled with disgust. Straightening himself, Naruto noticed that the person in front of him was around his height, though he appeared to be a couple years older. He could sense the man had chakra inside of him which made him a yakai. The man had curly blonde hair a few shades darker than his own. Tilting his head to the side, he ran his hand through his hair before addressing the man who was blocking his path. "Can I help you or something? I just got done delivering something and I need to return to Yasaka-chan." Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly as the expression of the man before him changed into a narrowed-eyed glare, along with a small burst of killing intent. While he barely took note of it, largely due to having been blasted the killing intent of the Biju inside of him, he could see some civilians falter in their step before quickly looking around. "Can you not? I'm not sure what your problem is with me, but Yasaka won't be happy if these civilians end up having a heart attack from your actions." Naruto crossed his arms as he sent the man a glare. The two kept glaring at another, not paying attention to what went on around them before Naruto sighed. "Can you move to the side? I have to prepare myself for the celebrations held tonight and I told Yasaka-chan I would be back soon." The man scowled at him as his enhanced senses were easily able to smell Yasaka's scent all over him. He didn't say anything though, instead he abruptly turned around before entering an alley to Naruto's right. Naruto shook his head, he actually had somewhat of an idea what that was all about, but acting ignorant was the better option at the moment. Judging from the small burst of his kai, he had let out who knows what would have happened. He had basically spewed doubts inside the man's head by doing so. Not giving the man any answer to his thoughts and preventing a potential fight from breaking out. While Naruto was confident in his strength, he didn't know which species the other blonde was. Along with the potential collateral damage that would have happened, and he wasn't ready to face Yasaka's wrath. With a shrug of his shoulder, he placed both hands in the pockets belonging to the black with orange colored zipper he was wearing that was left open. Showing that underneath it he wore a high-collared white shirt which looked good on him if the blushing faces of some of the girls he had walked past. It helped his confidence, not that he really needed it since he already had Yasaka who was more than enough for him. He arrived back at Yasaka's residence after only a couple minutes of walking. Having been here for close to 3 months had given him more than enough time to figure out some of the shortcuts which led him to his destination much quicker. As he entered inside, he immediately heard Yasaka's soft humming, courtesy of his fox ears that were hidden by a simple illusion she had taught him. A basic skill every yokai was capable of in order to fit in with the humans. It was still weird for Naruto to consider himself no longer human. He was sure if he had arrived anywhere other than Kyoto, he would have panicked a whole lot more and potentially got himself captured. It was only due to Yasaka's help he was able to integrate in this new world. A frown slowly formed as his thoughts went towards Yasaka and in turn to the blonde man that had stopped him in the middle of the street not too long ago. He was going to keep an eye out to make sure he wasn't going to attempt anything. While he doubted he was going to try anything against Yasaka, the reason being that said vixen should be quite a lot stronger. That and he seemed to have a rather unhealthy interest in her. Though Naruto couldn't really blame him. Yasaka was after all a very sought-after woman not only in Kyoto but in general. She had both looks and power, the latter being more important when it came to the supernatural she had told him. It was the fact that she couldn't leave Kyoto for long amounts of times at once, combined with a somewhat intimidating position as yokai leader she had that put off most people that were interested in her. Kind of pathetic in his opinion, but whatever. Their loss is his gain and she was definitely worth it. Something wrong? The soft-sounding voice of Yasaka reached his ears and he turned to her, only to realize he was sitting on the couch next to her. "What do you mean? Well, you didn't even greet me and you walked in with a frown on your face. Did anything happen while delivering those papers?" Naruto shook his head. "No. Well, actually yes." He sighed and got Yasaka's attention. She looked over to see him troubled. Not liking it, since he's usually quite upbeat, she wrapped an arm around his neck before pulling him down, so his head was resting on her lap. Naruto didn't fight it, instead closing his eyes as he felt her fingers began to run through his blonde locks. "Tell me what happened?" she asked him softly as Naruto dropped the illusion, allowing her to gently rub his ears. Purring softly from her ministrations, Naruto eventually answered. The assignment itself went alright. They were a bit skeptical upon seeing me, but showing the stamped papers got rid of that. Once that was confirmed, I handed it over and was done. They had invited me in, but I politely declined. The problem arose when I was heading back here." Naruto growled softly as Yasaka stopped petting his ears and stopped when she continued. "Where was I? Yes. I was walking back towards here leisurely when I was stopped as someone stood in my way. I don't know who this person was as this had been the first time I had seen him really. Anyway, I asked if there was a problem as this person was scowling and glaring at me, which only increased in intensity upon mentioning your name. He flared his kai in an attempt to intimidate me, something that only resulted in panicking civilians. We stood there for a bit, glaring at each other. I didn't do anything else though, as who knows what might have happened, seeing as he apparently cared little of not at all for bystanders with how he was flaring his killing intent. Luckily nothing came out of it, partly due to me acting ignorant to his apparent ire. Yasaka frowned as Naruto finished explaining. Gently she turned his head so he was facing her before speaking. Can you describe this person who was causing you trouble? What you told me is somewhat concerning, especially the part where he was putting civilians in danger. Eh? Only civilians. What about me? He pouted at her, which earned him a whack to the top of his head. Ouch. Yasaka shook her head at his antics. I know you can take care of yourself, Naruto-kun. The civilians on the other hand can't, especially not against someone capable of generating enough Kai to affect multiple people. Naruto sighed as he nodded. Yeah, I know. As for what he looked like, he was around my height, maybe a bit shorter or taller, I'm not sure. He had short curly blonde hair darker than either of us and brown eyes. Aside from that, there wasn't really anything else that stood out other than that I'm 99% sure he's a yokai, which species I'm not sure, but he could smell your scent all over me. Yasaka put on a contemplating expression at the description given Naruto while humming softly. From the description you gave me, I have somewhat of an idea who you're talking about. She mumbled softly, which wasn't missed by Naruto. The person you're describing, I know who you're talking about. She released a sigh. He's been a bother for a while, honestly. He's a Inugami, a dog yokai who had set his sight on me a while ago. I declined his advance though, it was clear what went on in his mind. He had little to no interest in me as a person, only seeing me as a piece of meat. She scowled, an expression that looked surprisingly hot on her, though he didn't say anything. Fool even fought me to show he was worthy. I don't have to tell you how that went, no. Naruto shook his head. While he had no idea how powerful that man was or Inugami in general, he very much doubted they were stronger than a Kyuubi. No, you don't. Seeing how we're currently positioned, it's clear to me. Yasaka smiled down at him before leaning down and pecking him on the lips. Pouting at how quickly she broke the kiss, he asked her another question. So should I be worried? Like, how strong is he, just so I know in case something happens? Well, I wouldn't say worried. Yasaka shrugged her shoulders. The fight between him and myself were quite a while ago, and he wasn't all that strong. Though perhaps his arrogance got in the way as I didn't have to put much effort in it at the time. Yasaka bit her bottom lip as she gained a thoughtful expression. He might be stronger, no, I'm pretty sure he is, as he seemed quite determined on getting me back then. Even then, the strongest Inugami ever recorded was only said to have reached ultimate class, and that was only after centuries of training. Interesting. Naruto mumbled before he sat back up. A mischievous glint in his eyes as he surprised Yasaka by casually lifting her up and placing her in his lap. It seems we both are in a sour mood. He whispered against her neck, making her close her eyes at the feeling. How about we change that, He didn't wait for a reply as he began to suck on her neck. Giving in to her lust, Yasaka abruptly turned around in his lap, so she was now straddling his waist while giving him a luring smile. I guess it wouldn't hurt. We still have a couple hours before the party begins, and it would do us no good to be in a bad mood by then. Glad you see it my way. With that, he sealed his lips to hers as they got into their favorite way to pass time. It was close to 9 in the evening, and in one part of Kyoto celebrations were held. Yokai of all kinds could be seen conversing with one another, while young children were playing with several stall games that had been set up. They all had their animal features out, as the celebrations were only attended by those that were yokai themselves, as each clan had received an invite for their members. Yasaka, along with Naruto, were present as well. The two had garnered several raised eyebrows upon their arrival as they had their arms locked. Of course, it was widely known by the general populace that he was living with Yasaka, and the two had a good relationship with another. Just exactly what sort of relationship wasn't as known. Most merely wrote it off as Yasaka allowing him to stay with her due to him being a kitsune yokai as well, with very few people knowing the extent of their relationship. Those few though did know exactly what it was, having seen the two walk arm in arm together that evening when he had asked her out. They too had noticed that Yasaka seemed much happier the past few days, almost glowing even. Coupled with the fact that their enhanced smell was easily capable of picking up Yasaka's scent all over him, and likewise the same with her, it wasn't hard to come to conclusions. Currently, Yasaka was having small talk with several clan heads. While it appeared they were congratulating her on another year under her leadership, Yasaka knew otherwise. They were trying to earn favors from her. While not noticeable in the beginning, she could see where they were trying to lead their conversation towards. They were greedy, not as much as devils who practically lived off of it, but enough to assign said sin to them. It was in the blood of any supernatural being to gain more power for their own cause. She sighed as she wished they would finish up so she could spend more time with Naruto. It was weird how, despite only being a couple for so short, she already disliked being away from him even for short times. Seeing how they weren't going to stop for a while, she sighed before she started looking around for the other kitsune yokai that was at the party. There. She saw the familiar sun-kissed spiky blonde hair with a pair of fox ears peeking out between them. Yasaka narrowed her eyes and began to growl softly as she saw several nekomatas surrounding a flustered-looking Naruto. Each of them was wearing a skimpy kimono that revealed way more than necessary, while giving him subtle touches. The men talking to her gulped as they could sense the slow build-up of killing intent coming from Yasaka and took that, along with her growling, as a sign they were overstepping their boundaries. Seeing that they stopped talking to her, Yasaka huffed before she began marching over to Naruto, who turned his head towards her as he could sense her nearing him. His eyes showed relief as she pretty much scared away the three dark-haired nekomatas as they got the message that he was clearly taken. Naruto gave her a thankful smile for saving him from the trio. "Thanks, Yasaka-chan, who knows what might have happened had you not scared them away. They didn't listen when I said I was here with company." "It's okay, Naruto-kun, I shouldn't have left you by yourself." She apologized, which he waved off as he offered her a drink. This is pretty good," Yasaka commented as she took a sip. Next to her, Naruto agreed as he too took a sip of his drink before agreeing. The two stood there for a moment, just leaning against the other as behind them Yasaka intertwined her tails with his. The only sign that he noticed was the slight shiver that ran down his spine, which he ignored as he let his eyes travel over the attendees, looking away as he locked eyes with the trio of nekomatas from earlier, who sent him flirty winks. Honestly, Naruto wondered what it was that made the woman of this world so attractive. Seriously, everywhere he looked the girl's woman possessed otherworldly beauty that made Kunoichi back in Konoha or anywhere else pale in comparison, their yaokai features just adding to their appeal. He glanced to Yasaka, who was resting her head on his shoulder with a content smile on her face. It was a smile that fit her well as it increased her already immense beauty. He wondered if bringing Yasaka and him together was a way of fate saying sorry for fucking him over in his younger years. If it was, he welcomed it and would treasure her with everything he could. He leaned his head down and kissed her between the ears, earning him a look from Yasaka, which he replied with a smile, before whispering something that caused her eyes to widen. "I love you, Yasaka-chan." It was the first time he said that to someone. His younger self would have imagined himself saying it to Sakura, but not this version of him. Even what he felt for her when he was younger was nothing compared to how he was feeling whenever they were together. It was a feeling that was hard to describe, aside from that he felt a pleasant sensation around his heart whenever she would flash him a smile. Or the feeling of electricity running through his body with a single touch, and the feeling of ecstasy that threatened to overwhelm him when they would lock lips together. Naruto raised an eyebrow as all of a sudden the music changed into something more slower. Feeling a tug on his arm, he looked at Yasaka to see her smiling at him while nudging her head toward several dancing couples were at. "Yasaka, I don't." Naruto tried to find the correct words, only to falter as her bottom lip began trembling. "Please?" she asked with a cute tilt of her head. Knowing that he wasn't going to win, Naruto sighed before nodding and was rewarded with a beautiful smile as she began leading him to where the other couples were. Naruto let his eyes travel downwards as he noticed the sway of her hips, which was accentuated by the form-fitting dress she wore. Well, it seemed he was going to get something out of it to make it worth possible embarrassment. Naruto took notice of the stares that were on them, though he did his best to ignore them by focusing on the Yasaka, who stopped before turning to face him. "Ah, I have no idea how to dance, by the way," Naruto muttered as he averted his gaze. Yasaka just smiled at him. "That's alright. Just follow my lead, okay?" Nodding his head, Yasaka moved one of his hands to her waist while intertwining their fingers with the other. Smiling at him, Yasaka began swaying softly in tune with the music that was being played as Naruto did his best to follow her lead like she told him. He was a bit clumsy in the beginning, but quickly adapted, which wasn't really a surprise as he always was more a hands-on type of person. As they slowly danced to the beat, neither Yasaka nor Naruto broke eye contact, with the former smiling lovingly at him as he did the same. Naruto stayed silent during their dance, unaware of just how much attention the two were gathering, as his eyes were entranced by her beauty. Her golden blonde hair waving lightly as he twirled her around before surprising her as he pulled her closer, so now she was resting her head against his chest. The hand that was previously held by her own was now resting on the small of her back. "This is actually quite nice," Naruto said softly. Yasaka just hummed before looking up as she felt Naruto stiffen for a brief moment. "Something wrong?" Naruto didn't reply immediately, prompting Yasaka to raise an eyebrow. "Look towards the corner on your left, he's been sending killing intent towards me," he whispered in her ears, whom twitched. Doing what he asked, from the corner of her eyes Yasaka could see who he was talking about. She recognized the person being the same blonde man that had been bothering her and now had set his sights on Naruto. Standing on the tip of her toes, she placed a kiss on the corner of his mouth. "Just ignore him, alright? I want to spend time with you without worries." Naruto gave the other blonde a last glance to see him now glaring at him before nodding to Yasaka. "Good," she purred sweetly. "Keep this up and I might reward you later." Had he still been the naive boy he used to be, he might have wondered what she meant by rewarding him. But he no longer was that simple-minded child, so he gave a smile as he pressed her a bit closer, already looking forward to when they would go back to her home. Naruto yawned as he ran a hand through his disheveled blonde locks. His feet were being dragged across the floor as he was still half asleep, evident by the lazy bobbing of his head with every step he took. Stumbling in the living room, Naruto took note of Yasaka, who was awake as well and looked a whole lot better than he did. "Morning, Yasaka." Naruto stopped mid-sentence as he fell to his knees. His hands were clenched into fist with such force that blood leaked out of his palms. "Ahhh." Naruto yelled as he felt like his entire body was on fire, while at the same time a part of his body was being forcefully pulled elsewhere. Never before in his life had Naruto felt this kind of pain. Even the Chidori Sasuke kid impaled in his chest paled in comparison to the hell he was currently in. Just as his head was about to make contact with the floor, Yasaka was at his side, worry clearly visible on her face. "Naruto-kun." She pulled his head into her lap before placing a hand on his forehead. Her worry increased as she felt how hot he currently was. His eyes were unfocused and aimed at the ceiling. Channeling chakra to the palm of her hand, she watched as his body slowly stopped trembling. Yasaka breathed out a sigh in relief as Naruto's own breathing calmed down and his eyes regained their focus, if only very weakly. Thank you." Naruto whispered weakly with a half-hearted smile. I think I'm going to pass out now." No sooner than those words were spoken, he closed his eyes, leaving Yasaka cradling his unconscious body. Seeing how they were still on the floor, Yasaka stood up before gently lifting up his body before carrying him to the couch. She sat down herself before placing his head back in her lap and began running his fingers through his hair. While on the outside Yasaka was taking care of him, Naruto woke up inside of his seal. Groaning, he sat up, realizing he was in front of the bars that held the Biju at bay. Sighing audibly, Naruto stood up before he walked closer, all while the Biju stared at him. "So," Naruto scratched the back of his head. "You have any idea what that was?" The pain I felt was on a whole other level than anything before. The Biju kept quiet for a moment and Naruto was about to ask something else when he spoke. "What you experienced was a result of those toads trying to summon you towards them. You should be glad it failed, as you would not have survived had they succeeded. The amount of chakra required was more than they are capable of using." Naruto frowned at that. "What do you mean I would have died? Would you not be able to keep me alive like before?" The Biju scoffed. "Foolish boy, if I would have done that you still would have ended up dead. Your body is not capable of accepting more of my chakra than you already have anymore, and your body would die from the inside." I see. Naruto looked down at the ankle-height water for a moment. "What about my own healing factor, would that not help?" "No, well, your body is stronger than it was before the transformation, it is still not enough to survive dimensional travel on this scale. Even ours combined would not be enough." Naruto clicked his tongue. "Oh, is there something I can do to make it stop? Knowing them, this won't be the last time they will attempt to reverse summon me, and who knows what will happen the next time." "No, there's nothing you can do unless you can contact them and tell them to stop. You'll just have to endure. Now leave, I'm in no mood to speak longer than necessary, and that vixen of yours is worried." Naruto's eyes lit up at the mention of Yasaka. "Very well, thanks anyway. It's been nice talking with you, regardless of how short it was." His words surprised the Biju, though he didn't reply as he watched him disappear from the seal. Keeping his gaze on the spot Naruto previously occupied, he released a snort before going back to slumber. "Are you okay?" Naruto heard as he regained consciousness. His blue eyes looking up at Yasaka, who still had a worried expression, and nodded softly. "Yeah, I now know what the cause was." Yasaka raised an eyebrow. "Really?" She sounded surprised. Naruto nodded. "My homeworld was attempting to summon me back. It obviously didn't work, and the result was me feeling like my body was being pulled apart." Yasaka frowned at that, a pang of pain shooting through her at the thought of losing him. "Is there anything I can do to help? I don't want you to leave." He shook his head, much to her disappointment. "No, even the Biju inside me said I just have to endure. The ones attempting to summon me are not powerful enough, and there's a large chance nobody is. I won't leave though, so don't worry, alright? I want to build my future here, with you." The latter was whispered softly, though Yasaka was still able to pick it up. She smiled down at him, she too having the same thoughts, though she didn't voice them. Instead, she asked him something else to change the topic. "Are you by any chance hungry? I can prepare us some breakfast if you want." Naruto nodded his head at the thought of her food. "That would be nice. I love your cooking." Giggling softly, she gently moved his head off of her lap before she stood up, not before giving him a kiss beforehand. "Alright, I'll be back soon, okay?" "Sure." Naruto replied as he watched her leave. He propped his head up with his own arm as he thought back to Konoha. He wasn't lying when he told Yasaka he wanted to build a future here. Despite that though, a small part of his mind couldn't help but wonder what was happening back there or if he was ever going to see either of them again. Minutes later, just as she told him, Yasaka returned carrying a tray which held 2 bowls. Naruto quickly sat up while Yasaka took the seat next to him while giving him his bowl, which turned out to be filled with udon noodles, eggs and vegetables. He thanked her before digging in. Her homemade ramen was even better than Ichiraku's, something that he thought was impossible. Taking a brief moment to watch as he dug in, Yasaka joined him while informing him of what they would be doing for the day. "Oh, thank you," Naruto said with a slight incline of his head in thanks as a steaming hot freshly made bowl of ramen was placed in front of him. Picking up the chopsticks, Naruto wasted no time before digging in. It tasted good, as expected of ramen folk course, but still. It was Ichiraku ramen good, which was impressive as their cooking was only surpassed by Yasaka herself, whose homemade ramen was something completely else. Unfortunately, he himself sucked at cooking, though Yasaka had told him one of these days she was going to help him improve those skills. Speaking of which, the vixen was currently busy with her work as a faction leader, which is why she had directed him to this specific ramen stall. According to her, it was the best one could get, her own cooking excluded, and after tasting it, Naruto had to agree. Nevertheless, Naruto stopped thinking about it as he continued to almost inhale the food presented to him. The sudden arrival of someone who sat down right next to him caused Naruto to pause briefly before giving the newcomer a look over. First thing Naruto noticed was that he was taller than him, something quite surprising as the sudden growth spurt he had gotten due to the modifications to his body put him above almost everyone he had come across around here. The second thing was that he was big. Well, he himself was no slouch, his own body was more like a swimmer's body with lean muscles, whereas this person was more bulky with broad shoulders. He had dark spiky hair, not as wild as his own, but still spiky, and violet eyes similar to his when he had his kitsune features out. Naruto's eyes then narrowed slightly as he could sense the dark energy inside of this man, indicating that he's a devil. He didn't do anything though, as there was no reason, seeing as the man was apparently ordering some food himself. That, and Naruto could sense the large yet controlled amount of whatever energy devils used inside of him. Though he would inform Yasaka of it when he was done just in case. "Is there something I can help you with?" The man addressed him, which made him blink before meeting his gaze with his own. "Me? Not really, I was just surprised someone else came here as I heard this little shop isn't all that known compared to some other restaurants in Kyoto." Naruto quickly managed to form a reason for why he was staring at him. The man's violet eyes seemed to look at him for something Naruto couldn't quite place, but whatever it was, it must have satisfied him as he nodded with a big smile. "Indeed, but I thankfully managed to find this specific one when I was visiting here last time while hungry. A good thing too, as you can't find stuff like this back home." Naruto nodded his head in agreement to his words, though he actually could get this back home he could understand where he was coming from. "I'm Sarair Bale, by the way." He held out a hand towards him. Accepting it, Naruto gave him a smile as he too introduced himself. "Naruto Uzumaki, resident here in Kyoto." He smirked slightly as he could feel the strong grip he had, though he answered by increasing his own strength. After a moment of measuring the other's strength, Sarair let go as his food he had ordered was placed in front of him. Naruto watched as Sarair dug in as he too continued eating his bowl. Though he made sure to order another one. Sarair, hearing that, ordered another bowl as well, which gained Naruto's attention as he sent him a look. Their eyes met, and on some unspoken command, a competitive glint flashed in both their eyes before they began to devour their food with newfound vigor. Seconds later, Naruto finished his bowl only for his eyes to widen as Sarair was close to finishing with his as well, which was surprising given that he had started way before him. Luckily though, a new bowl was placed in front of him and he quickly got to work, a glance to the side showing that Sarair too had finished and already a new bowl was placed before him. Seeing that this was going to be harder than he had thought, Naruto kicked it up a notch, his hands a blur as he seemed to not even swallow his food. "Next. Next." Both exclaimed at the same time, which caused them to glare at the other. Lightning seemed to be flashing between their eyes. Unnoticed to either of them, or rather not caring, a crowd had started to form as they watched the two eat with a seemingly empty stomach. Bets were being made on who was going to outlast one another, while the owner of the ramen stall was working his ass off.